When I was in high school, something really strange happened one time. Early on in the school day, I remember that I was in class and I left to go to the bathroom. This was something that happened all the time. I left the classroom and started walking down the hallway. When I was nearing the bathroom, I remember that I came across this woman who I assumed to be a teacher. She looked sort of professional, and we kind of crossed paths in the hallway. I had never seen her before though, and knew most of the teachers in the school, so I thought that maybe she was a sub. When I was walking by her, she asked me where a certain teacher's room was. I can't remember the name that she said, but it was a name that I had never heard before, and like I said, I knew most, if not all, the teachers in the school. I told her that I didn't know, and then I kept walking. I made my way to the bathroom and went inside. After being in there for like a minute, I left and went back out into the hallway. Right when I started walking back though, I heard the announcement for a lockdown over the school speakers. I started walking faster to get back to my classroom. A short time later though, I ran into the woman again. She was walking in the hallway and saw me once more. When she noticed me, she said that I was not supposed to be out in the hallway. She very confidently told me that I needed to come with her and to go to her classroom for the lockdown. I started to say that I was going back to my own classroom that I had been in, but she interrupted me and said no, I had to go with her. So at that point, I just said okay and started following her. She started to walk very quickly and we went down the hallway. At first, I couldn't believe how fast she was walking, and I was trying to keep up with her. I really didn't want to go to her classroom, but she wasn't giving me an option. So we went down 2 hallways and she kept looking back at me like she was trying to make sure that I was still following her. Then we headed to the west wing of the school, which I was very familiar with. It was really just the gym and athletics area of the school, as well as some lockers and offices. There weren't really any classrooms over there. So at this point, I was very confused and also suspicious, because I knew this woman did not have a classroom over here. The longer I followed her, the more I got a bad feeling that got worse and worse, like I shouldn't be following her and I needed to get away. Then, one time when she wasn't looking back at me, I decided to just go back. I stopped and turned around and then just started sprinting back to my classroom. As soon as I did, the woman stopped and then started to chase after me. I ran as fast as I could, and at first the woman was right on my tail, but I was a lot faster than her and quickly able to pull away. I kept going and then made it all the way back to my classroom. I started banging on the door like crazy until I was let back in. I told my teacher about what happened, and she made a call to the offices. A while later, when the lockdown was lifted, I found out that the very same woman who had tried to get me to follow her was the cause of the lockdown. She had entered the school by breaking a window to an empty classroom. I'm not sure what exactly she wanted. She was not a substitute teacher at all, but was posing as one. Why she wanted me to go with her, I do not know, but I'm really glad that I followed my instincts and ran away, and that was the only lockdown in my high school career. It was crazy, and I'm glad that nothing like that happened again. I'm currently a high school gym teacher. This is something that happened just last school year. One day, I was preparing for a class that I was about to teach. In the class, we were going to be using the high school gymnasium and doing some activities. For this, I needed to get some equipment such as the orange cones and whatnot. But the school is kind of old, and the storage room for the equipment for some reason is not really that close to the gym. Instead, I have to walk down this really long hallway that's nearby, and there are a few storage rooms towards the end of it. So on this day, I left the gym and walked down this long hallway to the storage room. When I opened up the door, it was mostly dark inside of it. Now, these storage rooms are very cluttered. Things are not organized the best, and there are several shelves and other things in there, so it's kind of big. After getting inside, it was very dark. I didn't even bother to turn the light on though, because I knew exactly what I needed and where it was. However, after taking a couple of steps inside, suddenly I heard a noise. The next thing I knew, one of the equipment shelves was falling over, right on top of me. After landing on me, basically everything fell off the shelf. I was fine, but I was knocked down and covered in random stuff. It all happened so fast, but I knew that somebody was in here and had pushed over that shelf. It was not something that would just fall over on its own. I pushed the junk off of me and looked around. I heard somebody moving away, but didn't see who was in there. I got up to my feet and was about to go back out of the room into the hallway, but when I did, I heard another voice and turned and just barely saw what looked like a man. He moved out of view really quickly, and then he started to push over another shelf. I was able to get out of the room just before the other shelf came crashing down. When I left, I heard the guy going to leave as well. As I was walking away, I saw the door open and just barely saw this guy coming out of the room. I knew that he didn't work at the school. This was also no student. I then sprinted down the hall and ran back into the gym. When I got there, I took out my phone and reported the incident. The police were called and the school was put into a lockdown. For the lockdown, I went to an otherwise vacant classroom that was really close to the gym. This classroom did not belong to any teacher in particular and was used for gym classes as well as sports teams. So when I went inside there, I was all by myself and I locked the door. As I was inside, maybe 5 minutes later, there was a banging on the door. I had a bad feeling about it. I walked over and removed the window cover to look and see who was there. I saw the same man. As soon as he saw me, he tried opening the locked door. Then he started banging on it again. It was like he was trying to break the door with how hard he was pounding on it. But luckily, the school's doors were very strong. I just went back over to my desk and reported where the guy was. I hoped that he would leave me alone, but I also wanted him to get caught. He continued to bang on the door for a good 2 or 3 minutes. Then the police arrived. They were able to get the man and leave the school with him. I'm not sure how he got in. He had been hiding in that storage room for a while though, possibly as long as a day. I still can't believe that he pushed the shelf over onto me, and I'm glad that I'm okay. Every time I go to those storage rooms though, I still get worried that somebody will be hiding in there. For a little background, I'm a female and was 16 years old at the time of this story. I lived in a pretty typical suburb in America and went to a high school with a little over 1,000 students in it. One day during third period in first semester, it was a really nice day and we had gym class outside. My class in particular went to this field that was next to the football practice fields. It was a large open grass area, but it bordered this thick wooded area. Behind that was the baseball field and then a lot more woods. I don't remember what exactly we were doing out there, but we were playing some sort of game. I was standing at one end of the field with some friends and talking to them. We weren't really that invested in the game. At one point though, we saw that there was this random guy just standing in the woods. One of the guys in my class also saw him, and then he approached the man. The man in the woods was kind of tall and had blonde hair that was sort of poofy looking. He appeared to just be kind of standing there and watching us. It was honestly really weird, but the teacher didn't notice. The man was only visible to people that were at the same end of the field that I was on, and the class had about 25 or 30 people in it, so the teacher was always kept busy. After watching a guy in my class go over and talk to the guy, a couple of my friends got curious, and we all ended up walking over. When we got over there, I heard the guy talking, and he seemed a little bit off in general. It wasn't really a normal conversation that was going on. The guy in my class who I was sort of friends with was just asking the man questions. He was asking him why he was there and what he was doing, and then I remember that he even asked the guy if he was there stalking high school kids. The man denied it, but he did not give a good explanation as to what he was doing there. After just a couple of minutes, we all kind of walked away. The man then went off farther into the woods. We returned to our game after that. I really don't know if anybody told the teacher about this suspicious man. Looking back, we definitely should have. He didn't seem dangerous at all though. I know that my classmates were not afraid of him. The guy in my class who was talking to the guy was a football player and probably stronger than the man and could have beat him up. Anyways, after class ended, we all went inside and shortly after, class was dismissed. I then moved on to my next class period of the day, which was a math class. I remember that I sat in the very back of the classroom, and it was on the first floor of the school. As this class was going on, at one point, I looked to my left, which is where the windows were. They went along the entire left side of the classroom. It was a nice day out, and the teacher had a few of the windows open just a little bit. However, several windows had blinds down because of the glare of the sunlight. At one point, I glanced back, and I saw this guy walking up to the back window, which was right behind me. It was the same guy who had been in the woods at our gym class. He walked right up to the window by me and then waved at me. I looked over and I was really surprised. Another kid sitting by me saw the man soon after as well. The man outside then actually reached for the window and started to open it further. That's when just about everybody in the class looked over from the noise. Me, as well as some others, quickly got up and moved away from the window. The teacher noticed as well, and it was just chaos for a few minutes. The guy moved away though, but the school ended up getting locked down and the police were called as well. We were all locked down for over 30 minutes, and luckily the man never got into the school. Then the lockdown ended a while later, and we went to our next class and the school day moved on as usual. I remember that when school got out that day, I got to my car in the parking lot and went to drive home. However, on the way home, I noticed something strange. I was a few minutes into the drive and noticed an SUV following close behind me. I looked in my mirror and I was sure that it was the same man driving it who I had seen earlier. I really couldn't believe it. As I continued my drive home, he stayed following close behind me, and when I approached my neighborhood, he was still there. I realized he was definitely intentionally following me. Now, I had no idea what to do in this kind of a situation, but I knew that I couldn't just go home. So I started to make random turns, and every time that I did, the guy behind me would do the same thing. I was starting to panic, but then I got very lucky. I drove into this random street, and when I did, I saw there was a police car already pulled over. I drove past it, and then I started to pull over in front of it, and big surprise, the guy behind me kept going. I got out of my car and walked up to the officer. I told him what happened, and he ended up calling more units. I was able to get home safely as well after that. By the next day, the man had been caught. I don't know why he chose to follow me specifically, but it made me wonder if he was stalking me the entire time. I mean, he was at 2 of my classes and then was following me home. At the end of the day, I'm just really glad that he was caught. This happened when I was a 17-year-old girl and in high school. I played volleyball when I was in high school, and it was a big part of my high school career. I remember that sometimes we used to have practice really early in the morning before school. It was because the gym had to be shared with the other sports teams and stuff. So we would have practice at like 6 a.m. and it would go until about 8. One day I got up early at 4:45 a.m. to get ready for the day. I lived with my parents at the time in a pretty average neighborhood. Obviously, it was still pitch dark outside, and I left home at about 5:30 because it was only a 10-minute drive to the school. I had a car back then that I drove to and from school every day. When I left, I backed out of the driveway, and when I did, I remember seeing a car that was parked on the side of our street. It was sort of in front of our house, which was strange because normally no cars parked on the side of our street at all. And when I started to drive away, the car's headlights turned on and then started driving down the street after me. I didn't really think much of it until I turned off our street and the car went the same way. When I turned again, it did the same. I was starting to wonder if I was being followed for some reason. I did not recognize the car and wasn't sure who it would be. I kept driving to school though, and the roads were very quiet with it being so early. Me and the other car were about the only two on the roads. Soon I approached my school with the car still behind me. I turned into the student parking lot and there were hardly any other cars there. The only other ones were my teammates. I drove around and parked pretty close to the school. The car that was following me entered the parking lot as well, but did not park near me. It went to the complete opposite far corner than me, a long ways away. This made me feel better because it was so far. Plus, now that I was at school, I felt safer because when I got inside, I would be around a lot more people. I was curious as to who was driving the other car though, so I sat in my car and waited for a minute or two. However, nobody got out. The car was backed into a parking space, so kind of facing me, except it was just really far away. I got out of my car finally and then walked inside the school. Then I got ready for volleyball practice. By the time practice started, I had forgot all about the car following me. When practice was over, it was time for the school day. Now, the next strange thing that I remember was after my first hour class. At this time, keep in mind that I had forgot all about the car following me. Now, I specifically remembered that I was by my locker and standing near it talking to some of my friends. When I was looking around the crowded hallway, I saw this guy a long ways away just staring at me. It was strange because I didn't recognize him, and he also looked a little bit older. I just assumed him to be a senior who looked old, but I didn't know why he would be staring at me. I looked away and then looked again a short time later, and he was still staring at me. I was kind of creeped out, so I looked away again and then left for my next class. During this second-hour class that I was in, I remembered that the school went into a lockdown. I had no idea what it was about. The lockdown ended up lasting for almost an hour. At first, even after it ended, no information was given. By the end of the school day, though, I found out that it was for a suspicious man in the hallway. Somebody who was not a student, had no hall pass, and no credentials or identification. When questioned, he ran away, causing the lockdown. The police got called, and after the guy ran from them, he was arrested for trespassing. Everybody was talking about it. I didn't get confirmation, but I realized that it had to be the same guy, and I think that it was also the guy who had followed me to school from my house. It really creeps me out, and makes me wonder if he was stalking me. This happened back when I was in high school. I was a senior at the time. I would drive to and from school every day. I went to a pretty large high school. There were like 500 kids in every grade, and so I would have to park super far away. There was this parking lot near the school, and then another lot that was a bit of a walk. It was fine though, because there was a nice path through campus that had some trees and wildlife around it. So one day I slept in and was late to school. This rarely happened, but being a senior, I was always up late and having to drive myself to school, and I couldn't rely on the bus. So I drove to school and parked in my parking lot far away. I was hurrying as fast as I could, and I left my car and started walking down the path. School had already started like 5 or 10 minutes ago, so I was late, but I didn't want to miss very much. Not long into the walk though, I checked my phone to see the time. When I did, I saw a text from one of my best friends. He said that there was a lockdown in the school going on and he didn't know what it was for. When I saw this, I stopped in my tracks and then turned around. I didn't want to go to the school if there was a lockdown going on. Plus, I probably wouldn't even be let in. I hoped that everything was okay, and I turned around and walked back to my car. I got in and sat inside my car and decided to wait there until the lockdown was over. If it took too long, I would just drive back home to my parents' house. When I got back to the car, I asked my friend what the lockdown was for through text. He said that he didn't know, but they were just sitting in class and not doing anything. So I got in my car and sat there, and nobody else was around. I waited in my car for quite a while. I was getting bored, but quickly that changed. When I was sitting there in my car still, I saw this guy come running down the path towards the parking lot, and it was not a student, but a grown man. I didn't recognize him. The man was sprinting, and when he got to the parking lot, he started walking. The guy began going in between cars, in and out of my view. I just kept watching him, not really thinking much, but just wondering what he was doing. Eventually, the guy started getting closer to my car. Then he saw me. When this happened, the guy started quickly walking over to my car. He went straight for my driver's window and knocked on it. I rolled it down just a crack, I'm not sure why. Looking back, I should have just drove away. I don't know what I was thinking, but that's what I did. The man said that he needed a ride. He wasn't even asking for a ride, but more so just demanding one, because right after he said that he needed a ride, he moved back and tried opening the driver's side back seat door to my car. Thank God it was locked. I was still confused and surprised by what was going on. I didn't know who this guy was or where he had come from. He didn't say why he needed a ride or anything. Finally, I spoke. I asked the guy why he wanted me to give him a ride. He said that he didn't have time to explain and kept trying the door handle. He quickly grew frustrated and started banging on my window and telling me to hurry up, and he almost pressured me into it. I was this close to unlocking the door and giving him a ride, but thankfully I thought better of it. I said that I could not, and then I started my engine and backed up. He tried to get in front of my car and block me in, but I was able to go around him. Then I quickly drove away and went back home. I got back, and within like 30 minutes I found out that the lockdown was over, but I told my parents what happened and they called the school. I ended up finding out that the guy who tried getting into my car was the cause for the lockdown. He entered the school and was not supposed to be there. I got excused from the rest of the day of classes. That was the craziest thing that happened to me in my high school career. This happened when I was in high school. I was a 17-year-old girl and in my senior year. I enjoyed high school and had a lot of friends and overall did well in my classes. The school that I attended was very large, with over 1,000 students enrolled. During the time, I lived with my parents and siblings in a pretty typical neighborhood and house. That's the background for this, and it all started sometime pretty early on in the school year. I had an Instagram account, and my friends and I were pretty active on there and would post pictures and stories sometimes. A lot of people from my school followed me, but there were some other people as well, some people that I didn't even know. I had made my page when I was like in middle school, so I had it for a long time. Every now and then, some creepy guy would message me with either some scam or some creep trying to hit on me. I would just ignore them and sometimes block them. So one day, I remember that this random guy on Instagram started messaging me. I saw that he was following me, but I was not following him. I did not know who he was, but looking at his profile picture, he appeared much older. He said hi to me, but I did not respond. However, I think that a few days after that, he started sending more messages. He asked me where I lived, and asked me if we could hang out, but I still didn't reply. But the man was persistent. He asked if I lived in the city that I lived in, mentioning it. Then once more he asked if we could hang out or something, and he sent a bunch of question marks. This didn't make me nervous or anything, because in my pictures it was not hard to find out where I lived. I literally had my high school tagged in some of my posts and things like that. It was not a really small city, so there's no way that he would find me or anything. But still, it was annoying how he would not leave me alone, so I blocked him. After that, I didn't hear from him for a little while, but unfortunately it was only a few days later that I saw him again on Instagram. It was now a different account that he was using. I wouldn't have been able to tell that it was him at first, but when he sent me a message, it gave him away. He said something like, "Why did you block me? I want to see you. Can I come over?" This time, I finally responded. I said in all caps, "Leave me alone, you creep. I don't want anything to do with you." Then I blocked him again. I figured that that should send the message that I wasn't interested, and it would make it loud and clear. And after that, I didn't hear from him for the rest of the day. The following day, I went to school like normal. I was sitting in one of my first classes of the day when I saw that I got another Instagram message. I was instantly suspicious that it was the same guy again, just making another account, because nobody else was really messaging me that much at the time. It was once again another new profile. The message said, "I want to see you now. Leave your class." I said, "Make all the accounts you want. I'm just going to keep blocking you." But the guy responded again saying, "I am here to see you." Now, when he said that, I didn't know what he meant. I didn't respond, but instead just blocked him. Probably 5 minutes later, the school went into a lockdown. There was an announcement, and in my class, the teacher turned off the lights and locked the doors. Most of us students were confused. At first, I didn't connect the dots, but pretty quickly after, I did. I wondered if the man actually was here to see me. We all sat in the classroom, mostly quiet, for a pretty long time. There was no information given to us about why we were in a lockdown. It lasted for maybe 45 minutes if I had to guess, and then thankfully it was over. At that point, a lot of people were obviously curious. The word quickly spread, and I was able to find out. Sure enough, it was that guy who was harassing me on Instagram. He was easily able to find out where I attended high school because of my Instagram profile. So he shockingly showed up and walked into the school trying to find me. He did not know where my classes were or where my locker was or anything, but the school staff quickly saw that he didn't belong and locked the place down. The man got trespassed, and I had to go to the office and then to the police station to file a restraining order. I didn't know that the guy lived in the area at all, and as it turns out, he didn't. He drove over an hour just to see me, which I can't believe. I still am in shock that it happened, but thankfully I haven't seen him or heard from him since then. Many years ago, when I was in high school, I have a memory that stands out as being rather creepy. I think I was a sophomore at the time, so I was still pretty young. We had this gym class, and we would play all kinds of games in it and stuff. We would play dodgeball quite a bit, and we would meet in the gym. So one day, I'm not sure if this was before class or at the end of class, but many kids were just kind of wandering around the gym and talking. We were either waiting for class to start or for the bell to ring for us to be let out. Anyways, I was with one of my friends at the time whose name was Josh. We were pretty good friends, and we would talk all the time in class. Both of us were just kind of wandering around the gym and talking. I'm not really sure why, but we just kind of wandered to this one back corner near the bleachers. In that main gym, it was used for the basketball games, so they had pull-out bleachers on a few sides. They were pushed back to the wall though, but they still took up some space. There was this area where whether the bleachers were back or up, you could still walk underneath them. It was kind of like a walking lane, but that's not really what it was for. Frequently, trash would get stuck back there or whatever. It was kind of hard to see, and nobody would really ever go over there. I personally had never been back there before. So we were not going to go under the bleachers, but we happened to walk by kind of where you could see the entrance to go underneath them. When I did, I noticed that there was somebody there. At first, I thought that it was a student in our class, because that was a logical explanation. Josh saw the person as well, and we both stopped to look. This person was just standing there and not facing us, but the other direction. And they were also really far in there, like completely underneath the bleachers, exactly about halfway down. We were looking at this person for a few seconds. The longer I looked, the more I realized that it did not look like a student, but a grown man. Then they turned and looked over. It was a man, and he was not a student. He also did not appear to be one of the school maintenance workers. I would see a few of them around, and I recognized most of them. This guy wasn't one of them. This person wasn't doing any work either, but just standing there. As soon as the guy saw us, we both quickly moved away. Then we went back to where the rest of the class was. The man did not emerge from the bleachers. For some reason, I don't think we told anybody else, like the teacher. I'm not sure why, but I would just blame it on us being young and dumb. But anyways, for the rest of the class, I don't recall anything notable happening. But I do know that the next hour, I was in a normal class again. It was like English or something, but I remember that during that class period, there was a lockdown. It lasted for a while, maybe an hour, before it was finally over. Then the school day resumed. I remember hearing that there was a crazy guy in the school. I realized it was likely the man that we had encountered. How he got in the school, I don't know, but he was hiding under the bleachers in the gym. I'm not sure what his plans were, but I regret not reporting him to a teacher. I'm just glad that someone ended up seeing him and the school was locked down. He was obviously removed from the school and things could carry on, but it still creeps me out to think that I came face to face with that guy.
This happened when I was in high school. It was my sophomore year, and this was during the first semester. I remember that I was sitting in my history class, and we were just watching a documentary. That's what we did most of the time in that class. So right in the middle of it, the door to the classroom opened, and this random student walked in. She said my name, and she was holding what appeared to be a pass in her hand. So I got it from my desk and walked over to her. When I took the pass from her, it was for me to go to the library. I was confused at first because I was not aware of why I had to go to the library, and I had not been expecting to get any kind of pass at all that day. I showed the pass to my teacher, and then he said that I could go. So I left the classroom and headed out into the hallway. Now, class was about halfway over at this point. The library was basically on the complete other end of the school and was usually very quiet. So I remember walking there, and maybe 2 or 3 minutes in, I heard over the school speakers that we were having a lockdown. Right when I heard this, I wasn't sure what to do. I could try to go to the library, or I could try to go back to my history classroom. It would be a couple of minutes either way. I decided to go to the library. But as I was walking, maybe 30 seconds later, I saw a classroom and I knew that one of my friends was in that class. It was also a teacher that I had later on in the day. So I had the idea to stop and go to that classroom. When I went to the door, I knocked on it, and the teacher was very quick to open the door and let me in. Then I joined that class in huddling towards the back corner of the room. The lights were off, and things were really quiet for the most part. There was a little bit of whispering, and nobody seemed to know what the lockdown was about. However, about 15 minutes later, there was another knock on the classroom door. I think most of us in the room got nervous when we heard it. The teacher went to the door, and soon opened it up. I heard the voice of our vice principal. Then I heard my name get called. I was very surprised and confused. I got up and walked over to the teacher and vice principal, and she told me that I was not in trouble, but I had to go to the office. Now, at this point, even though I was told I wasn't in trouble, I was nervous. We went back to the offices where the principal was and stuff. Then, a very short time later, the lockdown was ended. When I went into the office, I was told some shocking news. Apparently, there was a man inside of the school who didn't work there, and he was the reasoning for the lockdown. But also, the pass that I got from the library was not real. The man somehow walked right into the school and was wearing somewhat professional clothing. I guess that he blended in, and most people must have just assumed that he was a sub or something. He found a kid walking down the hallway who was a teacher's aide, and asked her to deliver the pass to me. He had handwritten the note himself for me to go to the library. After the kid delivered it, the man was waiting around the library for me. What his intentions were, I don't know. I was told about this and asked a bunch of other questions. Eventually, after almost an hour, I was picked up by my mother and brought home. The man had been caught by police after they found him near the library. I had never seen him before, and I had no idea what he was doing. But apparently, he must have seen me if he knew my name and stuff. It still gives me the creeps to think about.
For some background, I'm a 36-year-old woman, and this happened 20 years ago. I was 16 and in high school. I went to an average high school with about 800 students that went there. It was a school that was close to my house, and I enjoyed going there. I had a nice friend group that I hung out with all the time, and overall things were going well for me. Until one day at school, something so crazy happened that it seared into my brain forever. So to explain it, one school day was going by like any other until we had a lockdown. I remember hearing that it was not a drill, and that made me kind of nervous. My mind was thinking of all the possibilities of what it could be, but in reality I had no clue. And this was before every student had a smartphone, so information wasn't quite as fast and we weren't able to just look things up. We sat in our classroom with the lights off and everybody was really quiet. The more time that went by, the more and more nervous I became. I tried to tell myself that everything would be fine. I was safe and in a locked classroom with a bunch of other people. I thought maybe some criminal guy snuck into the school, or maybe some student had turned violent. In reality though, I had no clue what was going on. So after like literally an hour of the school being locked down, the phone rang in our classroom. My teacher answered it and quietly talked. Then she hung up. A short time after that, there was a knock on the classroom door, and I saw the principal, 2 cops, and another man who I didn't recognize. They all looked around the room and then called my name. I didn't know what they wanted, but I got up and walked over to them. They walked with me all the way to the principal's office and told me what was going on. I was told that several students had been planning to kidnap me, and they had stopped it. This was a shock to me, as you could imagine, because I was completely unaware of it. I was told that several senior guys, as well as 2 of their friends who were 19 and 20 years old, were all in on it. They were a group of guys who I was not friends with, but I did know who they were. I had never spoken to any of them, and just knew that one of them was kind of a known drug dealer in the school. They all sat together at a lunch table. Apparently, there was this one other guy who was not really in their friend group, but they were cool with. That guy sat at their lunch table and didn't really talk much, but they just kind of let him sit with them. I think he was kind of a loner, or else just really shy or something. Anyways, this guy overheard the other guys talking about kidnapping me. They were planning it out, and it was going to be right after school on the day there was a lockdown. After the kid reported it, the school did an investigation. It was proven legitimate, and they locked down the school the next day and questioned the guys who cracked under the pressure. They were expelled, and the older guys were arrested. I think the younger guys were in a juvenile detention center for a while. The whole thing still blows my mind. I'm just glad that other kid spoke up. Who knows what could have happened? I remember my first ever school lockdown that I was a part of. It happened my freshman year of high school, and I was about 14 years old. I was sitting in geography class, and the teacher told us that there was a lockdown and it was not a drill. I remember that he locked the door to the classroom and then turned out the lights, and we were told not to get up from our desks. Now, nobody knew what the lockdown was for, but very quickly kids started to speculate. Nobody seemed to think that it was that serious, and most kids were just joking around. They were saying things like the school probably got locked down because a man was seen jaywalking nearby. Most people thought that the city our school was in was pretty boring and nothing crazy would happen. I personally was very curious, but I was also not too concerned and figured that it was nothing really that bad. As more time went by, us kids were talking a lot, and the teacher told us to be quiet a few times. The lockdown ended up lasting quite a long time. The more time went by, the quieter the classroom became, and the more worried I became. After over an hour, it was finally lifted. I remember feeling very relieved. We had just one class left for the day, and I remember noticing several police officers standing around in the hallways. The final class period went by pretty normal, and then we were let out of school for the day. I continued to see several police officers throughout the school. and out front were a bunch of police cars next to the buses and more officers standing outside. I still didn't know what the lockdown had been for though, but the police presence made things feel safer, but it also made it seem like something serious was going on and they were trying to protect the students. Now, I personally did not ride the bus home because I lived in a neighborhood behind the school. It was like a 10-minute walk past the school grounds and through another neighborhood to get to mine. So after school, I went around behind it and then went past the tennis courts and football field. Then there was another field before some grass and trees and residential houses. When I made it off school property, I walked down the sidewalk past these rather large yards to the houses there. One of the yards had quite a bit of trees in it and was basically a woods. I remember that as I was walking home and passed by this, I saw a man who was sort of hiding behind a tree. I noticed him and he noticed me as well. He looked very suspicious, and I instantly wondered if he had something to do with the lockdown. I tried to just ignore him though, and I kept walking. Luckily, he did not try to follow me or anything. I was able to make it back several minutes later and then arrived home from a crazy day of school. At this point, I was home alone because both of my parents were still at work, and it was like this on most days. They'd usually get back a few hours later. So I was hanging out around the house, and like an hour after I had gotten back, I was in the kitchen, which is at the back of the house. I remember looking out the back window to the yard. Just when I did, I saw a man come into view, walking into the backyard. The yard was completely fenced in and was not very large, but we had a few trees and a shed back there. The man walked around the yard and then went behind the shed between the wooden fence. I recognized the guy to be the same one who I had seen on the way home from school. I was very creeped out by this, and I felt like the right thing to do was to call the police. So I went over and dialed 911 and reported the guy. Thankfully, he hadn't seen me looking at him through the back window. I kept an eye out back as I waited for the cops to show up. The guy stayed hidden back there between the shed and the back wooden fence the entire time. After police went out to him, he briefly tried to run away before he was caught. The police stayed at my house for a while, and my parents soon got home. I ended up finding out that that man was wanted. He had been seen inside of our school and had entered without permission. That's when the school went into a lockdown. The man fled the school and was able to get away from police. After it was confirmed that he was not on school grounds, classes resumed, but with heavy police presence. They were also searching for him in the nearby area, and that's when I had seen him behind the tree, and then in my own backyard. That was a really crazy experience, and I'm glad that everything turned out okay.
This is something that happened back when I was in high school. One night, I was just at home and in my bedroom. I lived with my parents and brother at the time. I got this random text message and I didn't know the number. The text said, "I'm going to see you tomorrow." I asked, "Who's this?" When I did though, I did not get any kind of a response. I wasn't sure if this was somebody from school or what. I figured that it had to be, but I had no idea who would say that or why. So the next day, I got up and went to school like any other. I had forgot about the text message by then. But at one point in the day, I was sitting in a class where we were just kind of working on an assignment. Some kids were on their phones and stuff, and the teacher must not have been too strict, because I know that I went on my phone, and when I did, I noticed that I had another text message from the same number. It said, "I'm inside of your school." This was even more strange than the previous text, because if this was a classmate, why would they say it like that? They would have been at my school anyway. Once again, I texted back asking who it was, but once again, I did not get a response. Well, about 10 minutes later, our school went into a lockdown. I was still in the same class, and we had to stay in the room and turn the lights off and stuff. The lockdown went on for a pretty long time. In fact, it was over an hour. Finally, when it ended, we went back with our normal school day. Now, I had no idea why the lockdown had occurred at all. I tried asking a few friends, but they didn't know either. Well, later in the school day, I got yet another text from the same number. It said, "That was a close one." It was at that time when I finally connected the dots. I realized that this person may have been inside of my school. I went to my next teacher and I told her everything. She called the offices and had me go tell them the same thing. They ended up calling the police and stuff. Well, I didn't hear anything more that day. But the next day at school, I found out that the person in the school was a woman. I was shown a security image of her, and I had never seen her before. And after that, I never heard anything more about it. I don't know if she was ever found. I also never got another text from her. I don't know why she was texting me or in my school. It's still very mysterious to think about.
This is something that happened a long time ago. It was when I was a high school student, and I believe I was a junior at the time. The high school that I went to was sort of small. It was nothing crazy, but there was maybe 100 kids in each grade. The school had a large cafeteria kind of in the front of the building, and then hallways connecting off of that. One day I was in the cafeteria eating lunch. I was sitting with a couple of my friends, and in the cafeteria they used to have these TVs. They were box TVs that were mounted on the walls in the top corners of the room. Most of the time they would just show school announcements in a sort of slideshow. Then every Friday they would play the school news show that one of the production classes made. So as I sat there at lunch with a few friends, I remember noticing that something different was playing on the TVs. It was not the normal announcement slideshow of basic school stuff. There was one guy sitting at a desk and talking. But the weird thing was that the guy in the desk was wearing a black ski mask, so I could not tell who he was. My friends and I quickly started paying attention to it and talked to each other about how strange this was. This was towards the end of lunch period, but I could see some of the other kids around the lunchroom start to notice. The masked man on the TV appeared to be in a classroom because the desk he was at was the kind that most of the classrooms at my school had. However, he was just sitting in front of a wall and I had no idea where he was because it was impossible to tell exactly what room. At first, I did not have the slightest clue as to who the guy was or why he was on the TVs in the lunchroom. I soon thought that it was probably something related to the school news and was maybe supposed to be funny or a joke. I kept waiting for them to cut to the normal student reporters or something. Except the news was not supposed to be on that day and they never did cut to anybody else. The masked man was talking, but I could not hear a word he was saying because the TV volumes were either really low or off entirely. The video continued on for about 5 minutes straight. Then it abruptly turned off. All the TVs in the room went completely black, as if they were turned off. By now, there were only 2 or 3 minutes left of lunch period. We went on with our conversations, and then the warning bell rang, signaling that the period was over. We got up, and everybody started clearing out of the room. My next class was a long ways from the lunchroom, but it was just study hall, so I took my time, not caring if I was late. My friends went in the opposite direction first, which is where the locker commons were, and I joined them. I'm not sure why, but our locker commons that year for my grade was way out of the way. It was at the far corner of the school that was such a long ways from the other end, and it was not really near many classrooms. So I went to the lockers, and then I began walking to my class. I was running late, and the hallways quickly became empty aside from me. I remember that as I was walking, I heard an announcement over the school intercom. It was an announcement that the school was having a lockdown. Instantly, I felt nervous because I don't think that we had ever had a lockdown before, at least not when I attended school there. I had been a part of a drill once, but I wasn't really sure what I was supposed to do. I just started walking faster to try to make it to my classroom. As I was walking, I remember that I rounded a corner and I got into another hallway. This was one of the more narrow and quiet hallways in the school. I was using it as a shortcut to get to class faster. This hallway was near some of the tech classrooms and the floors were carpet. When I got to that hallway though, I saw somebody come around the corner far up ahead in front of me. It was a guy wearing a black ski mask, the same guy who had appeared on the TVs. I was very confused as to who this was, but I couldn't believe it that I saw him. But he was standing at the end of the hallway and now facing me. I kept walking, but now slowed down quite a bit. As I did, the guy at the end of the hallway didn't move. He just stood there looking at me. I had a bad feeling about it and would have to walk past him, but it appeared as though he was not going to get out of my way. I was still like 100 feet away though, but the guy had been standing there and not moving for like 10 seconds now. I knew that it would seem really weird if I just turned around and went the other way, but I didn't care anymore. I stopped, turned around, and just started walking back in the other direction. When I did, neither of us said anything, but after I had made it a few steps away, I heard him start walking. It was quiet because we were on carpet, but it was enough to let me know that I really had to get out of there, so I literally just started running. I went out of that hallway area and bolted out. I went down a few different hallways pretty much in a panic. Then I tracked back around and went a long and indirect route to my classroom. Eventually, though, about 5 minutes later, I made it, and the masked man was nowhere in sight. In that time, I didn't see him at all. I was led in my classroom, and I was told that I was not supposed to be out in the hallways. I apologized and went to my seat. The lockdown lasted for about another hour. After it was lifted, I was sure that the masked guy was the cause of it. Within a few hours, word had spread, and I found out that he was in fact the cause. He turned out to be a student. I'm not sure why, but somehow he had gotten onto the TV, and apparently he was making threats in the video. The kid didn't have any weapons on him or anything, and I heard he claimed afterwards that it was supposed to just be a prank. But it sure was scary, and I'm glad that I got away from him. He ended up getting expelled for that stunt, and we never had another lockdown for the rest of the time that I went to high school. This happened during high school. I was a senior, and it was my first hour of the day. For that class, a big part of it was doing these projects. We would basically have like a big project every 2 weeks or something like that. One thing my school had was this hallway at the southeast end of the school where there were all these study rooms. They were small rooms with just like 4 tables, 2 computers, and a few chairs, and that was pretty much it. You could go into these rooms and study pretty much any time, and our teacher would have our groups break out into these study rooms sometimes. My partner for this project was a guy named Brandon who was pretty cool, and we were friends in high school. On this day of class, I think it was a Friday, which was typically an easier and more chill day. It was mostly a work day, and the teacher gave us the option to work on our projects in class or in a study room. I remember that he also said that we could do homework for other classes if we wanted, because the overall project was running a little bit ahead of schedule, and we were doing well. Brandon and I were the only people in the class of like 15 to choose to go to a study room. Everyone else stayed in the classroom to work or hang out there. So we went down the hallways and got to one of the study rooms, and they were all empty, so we took one on the end. We did some work for the project and also just hung out and talked and played on our phones and stuff. At one point though, we heard this noise come over the school intercom system. It wasn't quite the bell sound, and also class was nowhere near being over, so it got our attention. The next thing we heard was an announcement saying that the school was being locked down and to follow procedure. Brandon and I wondered if we should leave the study room and go back to our classroom or just stay there. For some reason, we decided to stay there. We weren't really sure what to do though, so we just turned out the lights. The door had no lock on it, so we couldn't do anything. But I think that Brandon and I were not that nervous about being in a lockdown. We figured that it was probably nothing. Pretty much we quieted down, but we continued to talk and hang out and just wait for the lockdown to be over. We even did some more work on our project. After maybe like 10 minutes into the lockdown, we heard footsteps coming down the hallway. We obviously didn't know who it was, but I kinda hoped and assumed that it was someone who worked at the school. But it was also then that the thought occurred to me that maybe we were in some type of danger. The footsteps got closer and closer, and Brandon and I quietly whispered until whoever was there got real close. Then we shut up and went completely silent. It seemed as though whoever was there was going to go right to our door and open it. But instead, the footsteps walked past and they continued down the hallway. We both felt a little better at that point, maybe a little too good, because Brandon then said that he wanted to see who it was, so he got up and walked over to the door. From the window, he couldn't see that far, so he then opened the door. I also looked out when he did because I was curious too. What we saw was this man who did not work at the school and was wearing a hooded jacket concealing most of his head. He was walking in the opposite direction and much farther down the hallway. He was also definitely not a student. But when we opened the door, he heard it, stopped, and turned around. When he saw us, both of our reactions was just to run. Brandon and I took off down the hallway. It was possibly the fastest that I've ever run in my life. We went down that hallway, turned the corner, and ran down another one. Finally, we arrived back at our classroom, and both of us knocked on the door and yelled for our teacher to open it. Thankfully, within seconds, he did so and let us back in. We got in the classroom and quickly locked the door behind us. The man did not try to get into the classroom or anything, though. I'm not sure where he went. The lockdown lasted for about another hour. Then finally, it was over. The man had been found in the school and was arrested. I never found out what he was doing or how he got in the school, but that was a really crazy experience. Something really creepy happened to me one time in school. I was a sophomore in high school and randomly sitting in one of my classes. I was kind of bored and started to go on my phone. When I did, I saw that I got added by a random guy on Snapchat. I didn't recognize the name, but I thought that maybe he was a guy who went to my school. The high school was fairly large, so I maybe wouldn't know him. I added him back, and just like 5 minutes later, he sent me a Snapchat, and I was curious as to who he was. So I opened the snap, and when I did, it was not what I was expecting. It was a picture of a classroom door, the same classroom that I was in. I recognized it because my teacher had her door decorated a certain way with her name on it. I sent a snap back saying "What's up?" because I thought it was a joke. I figured it to be another student, and I didn't even know why or how he was out in the hallways in the middle of a class period, but I thought he was just being funny and messing around. The next snap was also of the door, but taken from a different angle and a little bit farther down the hallway. It said, "Leave your class." I responded and said, "I can't, why?" The next Snapchat I got from him was a selfie of a really creepy looking guy. He was not a student, but a grown man who looked to be like 50. There was no caption to the photo at all. When I saw that, I blocked the guy. For a short time, there was nothing, and then I went back to paying attention to my class. However, maybe 10 minutes later, the school went into a lockdown. Almost immediately, I had suspicion that the creepy guy who Snapchatted me might be responsible. Still, I didn't hear right away what was going on. The lockdown lasted for what felt like a really long time. I think that it was about 40 minutes. When it ended, I found out that there had been a suspicious man inside the school. The same guy who had sent me those Snapchats. The creepy thing is that I don't know how he got my Snapchat or even knew who I was, and how on earth did he know which classroom I was currently in at the time? That really gave me the creeps. I reported everything to the school and also reported it to the police. I didn't hear much more about it after that though. Thankfully, I never saw the guy again. The scariest moment of my high school career happened when I was a senior. It was the first semester and about a month or two in. During that semester, my schedule was mostly pretty easy. I had completed many of the required classes, and I was in a college level class and another advanced one, but the rest of my schedule was just random electives that were super easy. In one of my hours, I was an assistant for the school offices. What I would do is just sit in the lobby area of the offices and do small tasks. My main task was delivering notes to students in various classrooms. I would receive the note with the teacher's room and walk there and deliver it. This is something that I enjoyed doing. Delivering notes was nice because it was cool to be the only one walking the empty hallways when class was in session. It would always be a little strange to walk into a classroom if the teacher was right in the middle of a lesson. I felt like I was interrupting, and then all the students would turn their heads towards me, which was strange. But other than that, I really enjoyed it. Anyways, this one day I was told to deliver a note like any other. I don't remember who it was for, and I didn't know the kid, and the teacher was somebody who I had never had either. The classroom was pretty far away from the offices, so I walked all the way there and delivered the note. It was probably like a 5-minute walk, and all the way at the other end of the school. So I was on my way back when I heard a lockdown announcement. I didn't know what it was for, but I really wasn't that concerned at first. We had a lockdown once before, and it ended up being nothing actually dangerous. But still, I knew I needed to get out of the hallways. When I was walking them, I hadn't heard or seen anyone. So I figured that the lockdown was probably not for something going on in the school. Eventually, I made it back to the school offices. However, when I tried the door, it was locked. This didn't surprise me much, being that it was lockdown protocol. So I just knocked on the door and figured that somebody would unlock it for me. But after I knocked, nothing happened. I waited for like 30 seconds and then knocked again, this time louder. That time I waited for over a minute. Nobody answered the door. I didn't know what was going on. They had to know I was out here. Could they not hear me or something? I didn't know. It seemed so loud when I knocked because the hallways were so quiet. I knocked one more time and this time called out, announcing that I needed to get in. Still, nobody answered. I was pretty frustrated, but also confused. Obviously, I knew that nobody was supposed to be out in the hallways during a lockdown, but what was I supposed to do? I tried to go back to the offices, so I started walking down the hallway. I didn't know where I was going, but I was just kind of wandering around, I guess. Really, I was just confused, and I realized that nobody was going to let me into the office, so I was frustrated as well. As I started to walk down the hallways again, I heard some footsteps not that far away. When I heard them, I felt happy. I figured that it was a faculty member, maybe a teacher, or maybe somebody who worked in the offices. I thought that I would find them and let them know that I needed to get back in the offices, and figured that they would let me back in. so I started walking towards the footsteps. When I got around a corner in the hallways, I saw someone. It was a man, but not someone who worked for the school. It was some sketchy-looking guy. He had longer stringy hair but was wearing a hat and also had a beard. Right when I saw him, I had a bad feeling. I no longer wanted to walk towards the footsteps. When he saw me, he didn't say anything or have any kind of expression on his face, but he did start to walk in my direction. I just turned around and started walking away, but tried to make it look natural, which it probably did not. I quickly turned a corner of a different hallway to be out of sight of the guy. When I could hear him drawing near, so I started running as quietly as I could. I went down that hallway until I saw another one, then I turned there. I walked down that hallway and still heard the guy walking, but could not see him anymore. I turned again, now into a back hallway area. When I was there, I was basically panicking. I thought about going to random classrooms, but given the fact that nobody answered the door for me before, I thought better of it. I was able to find a storage closet though and tried that door. Thankfully, it was not locked. I went inside and quickly but quietly shut the door. The closet was not that big, but did have some junk in it. I couldn't really see much though because the light was off and I wasn't going to turn it on. I just stood right inside and tried not to make a sound. For the first few seconds, I heard nothing. Then I thought that I could hear footsteps just barely. I couldn't hear well being inside there, but I only sort of heard the footsteps that one time. Then they pretty much stopped, and I couldn't quite tell where they were exactly. Things were really quiet in there for a long time. I didn't dare go back out into the hallways though. I stayed where I was and basically did not move. It felt like the longest time. Eventually, I went on my phone, but in that storage closet had no signal. I waited and waited. After what I would guess was over an hour, I finally heard that the lockdown was over. It was a great relief. I left the storage closet and went back out into the hallway. As soon as I did, the first person I saw was one of the women that worked in the offices. She got mad at me and said that I wasn't supposed to be out in the hallways. That really made me angry. I told her how I went to the door and I kept banging on it, but nobody answered. She claimed that nobody there heard anything. To this day, I don't know how that's possible. She told me I should have gone to a classroom. Well, that's easy for her to say. But anyways, I didn't get in any trouble or anything, and the lockdown was resolved. That man I saw was the cause of it. He had walked into the school at some point and was just wandering the hallways. Nobody knew what he wanted, but he refused to leave when questioned. Police got called, and they searched the school for him for almost an hour before he was found. This is the story of something that happened back when I was in high school. It was during my junior year, and I remember that I got wind we were having a sub for 5th hour. This was the last hour of the day, by the way, so when I heard about the sub, I had the idea to skip class. I would not normally be one to be skipping classes all the time, and I should have not done it looking back, but here and there I might skip a class that I hated, especially if it was the last one of the day. Plus, I knew that substitutes would often just take attendance and give out a random assignment. We probably wouldn't be doing anything notable like a test. My plan was to leave my 4th hour class, get my stuff from my locker, and walk out the school doors during passing time. However, I failed to execute my plan properly. I got lazy, and when I got to the locker commons, I was talking to my friend there for too long. So when the warning bell rang, I barely heard it. I was engaged in a conversation, and the hallways quickly cleared out, and my friend then walked away to leave to his class. I then gathered my things from my locker and went to leave. But by that point, basically everyone had cleared out of the area. I was still going to walk to the doors to leave, but then I saw one of the hall monitors come down the stairs that were right next to those doors there. I quickly had to move away. I went down a different hallway and was now kicking myself. I missed my opportunity to leave the school. Now I would have to run around and avoid hall monitors to leave. When I was walking away, my plans were to find another exit. I couldn't go to class now or I would be late. The warning bell rang as I was walking there. I was too committed. So I walked down another hallway and then took a left. When I got there though, I heard footsteps just around a corner. I assumed it to be another hall monitor, maybe the same one I had seen before, and I started walking faster. But the footsteps seemed to speed up. There was a moment where I knew they saw me, because they were in the same hallway as me. I heard them come around a corner. They were still a long ways back though, but they were in the same hallway as me for a few seconds. I thought I was going to get yelled at, but they said nothing. And I also didn't look back to see who it was. After maybe 5 seconds, I turned a corner and was out of their sight again, and I walked even faster. I then went down that hallway and turned again. At this point, I was just trying to get away. I was heading to the complete opposite end of the school. I made it to the cafeteria and kept going. I walked along the edge of it, as that was an area where people would definitely be around. When I made it past there, it led to a quieter hallway, which is where the Performing Arts Center was. This hallway had carpet on it, so it was quieter to walk and I couldn't hear the footsteps behind me as well. I also didn't bother to look back and see if anybody was there. I walked closer to the Performing Arts Center, or the PAC, which is what it was called. That's where they would have plays and whatnot. I arrived by the doors and tried to enter, but they were locked. So I went to the left and then around a corner. I had hoped that I could get in there because there were a lot of good hiding places as the lighting was very dark in there. However, with the doors being locked, I went to the left and around a corner. I wasn't hearing the footsteps anymore, but I wasn't going to take any chances. There was this seemingly random door near the PAC that I tried, and it just opened. It led to this small room that was maybe a storage closet or something like that. It had carpeted floors, and the lights were off, so it was pitch dark. So I couldn't really see anything in there, but I could sense that it was pretty small. I didn't dare turn a light on. I just hid there. About 30 seconds later, I heard someone walking by outside. Then things went quiet. For maybe 5 minutes, there was nothing. I thought about leaving, but deemed it too risky, so I did not. Then I heard an announcement. I couldn't hear that well with being in this hiding spot, but I was able to make out the word lockdown. This was crazy. I remained where I was, because obviously I couldn't leave here now. I hid in there and was completely quiet for the next 30 minutes or so. Nobody walked by or anything. Then the lockdown was lifted. I heard another announcement saying that it was over, and a short time after that, I heard the bell, and classes were dismissed for the day. Only then did I discreetly emerge and continue over to my locker, get my stuff, and then finally leave and go home. I later found out that some guy was in the school, and I think that's who was following me. The lesson I learned was to never skip class. In one of my first years teaching, something crazy happened. It was just my 3rd year as a teacher. All of them I had spent at this high school that I do not work at anymore. Overall, I liked it though. Most of the students as well as the other teachers seemed nice, and they were pretty good. So, during the time of this story, I had my own classroom and I would teach 4 classes per day. In between class periods, sometimes I would stay in my classroom, and other times I would leave and come back. When I did, sometimes I would use the restroom, and other times I would stop by the teacher's lounge. But I would always keep my classroom door open for students that were arriving for my next hour. So one time, I just remember that I came back to my classroom, and out of nowhere there was a note left on the chair behind my desk. I picked it up and read it. The note was a simple piece of paper with the writing in pen that said, "I'm going to get you, watch your back." This seemed very threatening, and I didn't know what to make of it. Was this serious, or some kind of a joke? I looked at the students that were currently in my room. It was just a few kids from my next class that were there early, and most of them I knew were good students and wouldn't do something like that. I held up the note and asked, "Did anybody here leave this note, or did you see who did?" Everybody just looked around and shook their head, so apparently nobody knew. Someone asked what it was, but I didn't want to say, so I just went on with class like normal. I figured I would ask the previous hour class the next day if they saw anything. I didn't report it because I wanted to see if I could figure it out for myself of who did it first. Plus, on the chance that it was a prank, even though that's messed up, I didn't want to get somebody suspended or anything. Unfortunately, I ended up forgetting. I got really busy with other things that I had to do, and it just slipped my mind. I forgot about it until the next day. That same class, at the same time of day as before, I went back into my classroom to find another note in the same spot. This time, it was worse. The note said a date and time, as well as my home address. When I saw it, I was more creeped out now because I didn't know how somebody would know where I lived. I asked my class again, and once more nobody knew or had seen who did it. This time I decided to report it. The date and time was for 2 nights later, and I think it was like 9:56 p.m. or some random time like that. So I taught my class, and afterwards I went to the office and reported what happened. When my next hour started, the school actually got locked down, which I did not expect. The lockdown lasted for about an hour. After the lockdown ended, the school day resumed as normal, but I got a call from the principal. He told me that they did not find who had done the note, but they thought they had some leads. I didn't really know what that meant, but I was told to be careful. The next day, I did not leave my classroom at all, in hopes of either catching who was writing the notes or stopping them from doing it. And I didn't see anything suspicious or get another note that day. The following day after that, the school day happened as normal and nothing strange happened. I also didn't leave my classroom that day. But that night was the date and time of the threatening note. To be frank, I did not think that anything would happen. I assumed it to just be a teenage prank or a harmless threat. I didn't know why anybody would write those things to me. As far as I was aware, most of the students liked me. I wasn't especially hard on anyone or strict, so I thought that maybe the kids were just pranking me. But still, just to be safe, I decided to go out that night. I hung out with a friend and was not home until after the threatening time. Probably an hour or so after that time, I returned back home. I was living in a small house that I was renting at the time. I was in a mostly quiet neighborhood that was about 10 minutes from the high school. When I got back home, I saw that my front window was smashed. I couldn't believe it. I didn't go inside but called the police. I was shocked that something had actually happened. I waited for the cops, and when they arrived, I told them the whole story. They looked around my house and found a guy hiding inside. He turned out to be a student at the high school, but he had never been in any of my classes. I have no idea why he did it. He got arrested for breaking in, and he was also expelled from the school. It was something that shocked me, and it's part of the reason that I changed schools. The place I work at now is nice, and there have not been any incidents. Back when I was in high school, I remember that one time we were going to have a planned lockdown drill. I remember that we would have these about once or twice a year. Sometimes they would even tell us like the day before that we were having a drill. I think that was so nobody would be alarmed by it and worry that it was real. So on this one day, I knew that we were having a lockdown drill during the 5th period, which was the last one of the day. The drill would usually consist of an announcement, and then the teachers turning off the lights to their classroom and locking the doors. Sometimes they would make the students huddle in the back of the classroom. Other times we would just sit in our desks. My last period of the day was usually pretty boring, but I did have one of my best friends in that class, Ryan, with me. This particular time, I remember that after 4th period, Ryan said that we should skip 5th period. At this moment, we had both completely forgot about the lockdown drill. I just remember that I knew we weren't doing much in the class, and so did Ryan. It was basically like a work day, where we would just work on homework assignments and stuff. So being immature high school kids, we decided to skip class and head home early. We went to our lockers to get our stuff, and took our time as the bells sounded, indicating that class was now in session. We were in no rush, because the school was not super strict, and we figured we could just walk right out. After we left our lockers and started down a hallway, I remember that we heard the lockdown drill announcement. That's when we both remembered it. We figured that for the drill we had better not be out in the hallway, because a hall monitor might see us and make us go to class. Plus, we were sort of far off from the nearest exit doors to the school, so we decided to go find a bathroom until the lockdown drill was over. However, on the way there we soon heard footsteps behind us. We turned a corner and didn't look back, assuming it to be a hall monitor, so we walked faster and then turned another corner. When we did this, it sounded like the footsteps behind us were going faster as well. We quickly made our way to a bathroom and then went inside. Ryan went in one of the stalls and I went in another. We didn't close the doors to the stalls, but they stayed mostly closed on their own. Then we stood on the toilets so our feet couldn't be seen on the ground. A few moments later, we heard footsteps quickly approaching outside in the hallway. Whoever it was actually entered the bathroom, which caused me to be very nervous, and I'm sure Ryan was as well. We just stood there as quiet as can be. The person then entered the bathroom very briefly and then walked out pretty fast. It was like they just looked in really quick to see if anyone else was inside of it and then continued on. Now, Ryan and I both left our hiding spots a little bit quick. Probably like 10 seconds later, we had left the stalls and started to walk out. When we left the bathroom, we noticed that the person was still in the hallway. It was a man, and he had made it almost to the other end of the hall, and he was walking facing away from us. But we realized that this likely was not a hall monitor. He was wearing just a black jacket and jeans, which is not something that a school employee would wear. After we got out into the hallway, we noticed the man stop and then start to turn around. Ryan and I both quickly went in the other direction of the hall and then turned the corner. We started walking down the next hallway very quickly, just trying to get away from the guy. As we continued though, we soon saw someone else up ahead. This was a teacher that we both recognized. It was Mr. Herbert, and he saw us and asked us why we weren't in class, saying that a lockdown drill was going on. We told him that we were sorry and would go to class. As Mr. Herbert walked with us, escorting us to our classroom, we told him about the other man in the hallway. He didn't seem to have any idea who we were talking about and said that he would find out. Soon we got to our classroom and were led inside. And several minutes after that, there was another announcement stating that the school was now having a real lockdown. Several times they said that this was not a drill anymore. This lockdown lasted for about an hour until it finally ended and the school got out at about the same time. We learned that the man we had seen in the hallways was not supposed to be in the school, and he was arrested for trespassing after hiding in the school. Nobody knew what his intentions were. I think it's really crazy how he just happened to be there during a lockdown drill. Did he somehow know we were having a drill and did it on purpose so nobody would suspect him or notice him? I don't really think so, but it makes for a crazy coincidence. I'm also really glad that he didn't look farther into the bathroom where Ryan and I were hiding. We both learned a valuable lesson that day not to skip class, and I don't believe either of us ever skipped again after that. This is something that happened back when I was in high school. It was my sophomore year, and I remember that I was taking a gym class. It was a basic gym class where you would do a little bit of everything. One day in particular, we were doing some kind of cardio workout. At my high school, when I went there, they had a few different rooms that gym classes would use. There was the main basketball gyms, which were kind of in the center of the school towards the front. The weight room and then another exercise room were on one side of that by the locker rooms. Then, on the opposite side, there was this long hallway, and down there was this room called the cardio room. I think it was actually the old weight room back in the day, and then they moved the weight room to a larger and nicer space, and they changed this room to cardio. It had mostly machines like treadmills and bikes, but there were some weight machines as well, and they also had some ellipticals and other stuff. There were a few dumbbells and things like that, but most of the equipment in that room looked really old. So for some reason we were doing a kind of workout on the treadmills and bikes in that room, as well as jump ropes. I don't remember the whole workout, but basically we would all go at our own pace. When we had completed the workout, we would go into the main gym and play basketball, which was basically an open gym. The teacher went into the gym to oversee it. So we all did the workout in the cardio room. I remember that I was on the bike for a while taking my time. I wasn't in a real hurry to finish, even though I did enjoy basketball. But I worked out on my own as well as this class, so in gym class I would kind of just take it easy and be lazy, to be honest. None of the stuff we did was really that hard. About probably half the class finished before me. After the bike we had to do some jump rope work out there, and then when I was finally done with that there was maybe 20 minutes left of class. So I left the cardio room to go to the gym, and when I did, all I would have to do was walk a ways down the hallway and then cross it. I finished the cardio workout and didn't really get done at the same time as anybody else. So I left the cardio room by myself and stepped out into the hallway. This hallway was a quiet one, and it was on the end of the old wing of the school, and not too many rooms were in use over there anymore. As I started walking down the hallway though, I saw something almost right away. There was a man, a grown man, trying to enter the doors to the gym, the same doors that I was planning to go through. The guy was tugging on the doors and they appeared to be locked. I had never seen this guy before and did not know who he was. He did not seem like a teacher at all, and the way that he was aggressively trying to open the doors gave me a bad feeling. So I turned and went the other way. There were other doors entering the same gym if you went around the corner, so I decided that's what I would do. The man did not seem to notice me at all, but I never really had to get that close to him. So I walked around the corner to the north end of the gym. When I got there, those doors were also locked. I was confused. I knocked on them once, but nobody answered right away. I didn't know what was going on. But it was possible that they had put the dividers up in the gym and nobody was in that area. So I decided to go back around to the cardio room where the rest of my class was. I made the walk past the north end of the gym and around to the old hallway. When I made it back into that hallway, I no longer saw the man at all. However, when I walked over to the cardio room, I tried the doors there and they were also locked. I should have stayed there and kept knocking, but I was so confused that I started to look around the hallway. That's when I heard footsteps from farther down, and I had a bad feeling. So I quickly turned and just walked the other way out of instinct, going back to the north end of the school. As I was walking, I heard something come over the school intercom. I couldn't hear it that clearly, because you know how intercom systems are not always that clear, but I did hear the word lockdown. I was now realizing that the school must be in a lockdown, and that's why all the doors were locked. And somehow, some way, I had been trapped out in the hallways. I also realized that the man who I saw in the hallways trying to get in the gym was quite possibly part of this. so I walked faster now and went around the corner. I tried to enter the gym again, but it was still locked and nobody was answering the door. Then I heard footsteps behind me a ways back, so I quickly left that area. I went down a random hallway, and at that point I was getting nervous. I started quickly walking through more random hallways to try to get as far away from that guy as I could. After walking for a while and not hearing anything, I found a random classroom and I stopped and knocked on the door. I thought maybe they would let me in. However, once again, nobody was answering. As I was there knocking, I started to hear footsteps in one of the nearby hallways approaching me. Was the man coming after me? I knew that I needed to get out of there, and knocking on the door was only giving away my location, so I walked away from there quickly. I started going down more and more random hallways. Then I had the idea to leave the school entirely, so I headed for one of the back exits, which happened to be the closest one to me. However, when I got there, I tried opening the doors, but they were like locked from the inside. I didn't know what to do, so I turned around and kept going down hallways. The school was literally dead silent except me and this other guy. Every so often, I would hear his footsteps in a nearby hallway. I was desperately trying to get away from him. When I was doing so, I almost went into a bathroom to hide, but I thought better of it. I figured it was too risky. If the man got in there, I would be cornered, so I kept walking. I don't know if I've ever been more nervous than that. I felt like I had to keep moving and always be alert to where the man was, although I couldn't see him, only hear his footsteps in the distance. After a long time of walking, I thought that I lost him. I stopped hearing anything and I slowed down, but then I heard him again. So I walked faster and headed back to the front of the school. Then when I got towards the front doors, finally I saw something. There were a few police officers entering the school. When I saw them, I ran to them and finally was safe. They led me out of the school and I waited out front with about 10 police cars. I didn't know what was going on, but like 30 minutes later the cops told me that they caught the guy and things were safe. The lockdown ended and school resumed. The man thankfully hadn't harmed anyone, but he had gotten into the school and I guess he chased after several kids. I was mad about all the doors being locked, but I guess it was just bad timing. When I knocked on the doors, they probably thought that I was possibly the man. Either way, I'm glad that I got away from him, but I think it's really creepy how he was seemingly going after me.
Something crazy happened when I was in high school. It was during my junior year and a few months into the semester. I'm a female and was 17 at the time. One day, like any other, I went to school and it was my 4th hour class. Sometime during the hour, I remember that an announcement suddenly came over the intercom. We were told that the school was being locked down. Our teacher did all the things she was supposed to and locked the door and turned the lights off. Nobody really knew what was going on though. We all knew that it was not a drill, and everybody seemed a little bit worried. We all had no idea why the lockdown was happening. We just stayed in the room and things were very quiet for a while. After probably close to an hour, the lockdown finally ended. We were told that we would have the normal amount of passing time in the hallways, and then our final class of the day would be shorter than usual. So when we finally got let out of class, everybody was talking to each other about the lockdown. I was on my way back to my locker to drop my books off and get the ones for my next class. But before I could get there, I was pulled into the principal's office. I just remember that I saw the vice principal come up to me and ask if I could go with him. He said that I was not in trouble, so I followed him and we went to the principal's office. Then him and the principal both had me sit down and they told me what was going on. I was told that the school had been in a lockdown because a suspicious man had been seen inside the school during the class period. They went on to say that he was seen near the lockers but ran away when questioned. Unfortunately, he somehow left the school before the police got there and had escaped. The grounds were searched, and he was not on or near school property anymore. But when he was inside, he had opened one locker, which happened to be mine. He had brought a bolt cutter, which he had used to break open my locker. This obviously could have been used as a weapon as well, but the man unfortunately escaped with it. I was asked if I knew anybody who would do that or why, but I didn't know anyone. When they gave a basic description of the man to me, I had no idea who it was. I was really just as confused as anyone. I told them that I didn't know. After that, I looked through my locker and nothing appeared stolen. I didn't really have much in there except for my books for school.
So after that, the school day resumed. My parents got called, and when the school day was over, nobody seemed to know why the guy would do that. However, later on, something else occurred. It was that very same night. I remember that I was in my bedroom, which was at the back of our house. I was on my bed, just on my phone. But when I glanced out of the window randomly, I happened to notice something. It looked like somebody was walking through the backyard. I got up and moved over to the window. When I got a closer look, sure enough, there was a man there. I did not know who he was, but I noticed that he was walking towards me. I quickly ducked down so that he wouldn't see me. I then moved away from the window and hoped that the man would not approach it. But moments later, I saw him appear right on the other side and look in. I quickly ran out of my bedroom and found my parents. I wasn't sure if the man had directly seen me or not. Most of the lights in my room were off, other than one small lamp. I told my parents what was going on, and they looked out of a different window to the backyard. Then they called the police. My dad kept an eye on the guy out the window. The rest of us went to the front of the house. The police were really quick to respond. Within probably 5 minutes, they were there. And when they got there, the man was still prowling around the backyard. After they entered the back, the man tried running away. He made it out of our backyard, but not much farther. He ended up being caught. And we soon found out that it was the same man who had been at the school earlier. I didn't know who he was, but somehow it appeared as though he was stalking me. The whole thing was really crazy. I'm just glad that the guy was caught. I don't know what would have happened. I'm a high school teacher, and this is something that happened a few years ago. It's probably the creepiest thing that's ever happened to me. So it all started one day when I was teaching. I taught 4 classes throughout the school day at the time. I remember during the second period, right in the middle of class, there was suddenly a loud banging on my classroom door. It interrupted my teaching, and I stopped, annoyed, and walked over to see what it was. When I looked out into the hallway, nobody was there. This seemed like obviously a prank by some kids walking by who were supposed to be in class. Some of the students in my class asked about it and thought that it was funny. I was able to laugh it off as well and then continued with my teaching. The rest of the class period went by without any problems. The next class period, though, it happened again. I'm not sure if it was at around the same point in class, but it was sometime in the middle. There was a very loud knocking on the door once again. I looked over sooner this time and just barely saw through the window somebody moving away. However, I could not tell who it was at all or anything like that, just that somebody had been there. So I went over to the door, opened it, and looked outside. I was not on time to catch whoever had done it running away, so I went back inside my classroom and then told my class about how it had happened before. Then we resumed with class. As you might be able to guess, this happened yet again during the next class period. By now, I really couldn't believe it, and I was also getting frustrated. I thought about leaving my door open for the entire next class period, but ultimately I did not. And in the final class period of the day, there was actually no knocking, which surprised me but was nice. So I figured that it was probably a one-day thing and that it would never happen again. I didn't report it or anything because I didn't think it was a big deal. So the next day I was teaching my classes again. For the first 3 class periods of the day, they went by as normal. There was no knocking on my door or anything strange. Then, during 4th period, I got a call that the school was having a lockdown. I announced it to my students and started following the procedures. First, I locked the classroom door. Then I turned off all the lights in the classroom and instructed the students to leave their desks and go to the back end of the room. I also covered all the windows. Some students were asking why there was a lockdown, but I didn't know. I was not told a reason and was just told that there was a lockdown and to follow the procedure. The students were supposed to keep quiet, and overall everybody did a pretty good job. I heard some occasional whispers from my students, but other than that it was completely quiet. The lockdown continued for at least a good 30 minutes. Things were very quiet. Then, out of nowhere, I heard the same loud banging on my classroom door. I really could not believe it. The school was in a lockdown. Who would possibly be able to pound on the door like that? I got up and walked over to the door and looked through the small window. Nobody was there. Some of the students were talking about it now, and I told them to pipe down. So, about 20 minutes after this, the lockdown was lifted. Class was let out, and things resumed as normal. There was no knocking on my door for the rest of that day. When the school day was over, I talked with some other teachers because I was very curious as to why we had a lockdown. I was told that it was because a student in the school had made direct threats against another student. That did not really solve the mystery of the knocking though, unless that kid was out in the hallway banging on my door. How would anybody be able to walk around in the hallways like that during a lockdown? And why did they always bang on my door? I asked some other teachers and nobody had knocked on their doors. After that day, I never had any more knocking on my door during class. It was really weird and remains sort of a mystery to me. This happened when I was in high school about 10 years ago now. It was my junior year, and the first year that I was able to drive myself to and from school every day. So I would arrive just before classes started each morning. Usually I was never late. However, I would typically walk in just before classes started with about 30 seconds to spare, sometimes less. I'm not sure how I always timed it out so well, but somehow I did. Anyways, on this morning in particular, I did what I always did. I parked my car in the lot, entered through the southeast entrance, which was by the locker commons. Then I would walk up to the northeast wing of the school. That's where my first class of the day was, which was English. So when I entered the school, the warning bell had already sounded. There was approximately 2 minutes until classes started. So there were not that many students in the hallways anymore. As I kept walking, it was soon just me. When I got to the final wing where English was, I was making my way to class. There were doors at the end of this hallway that went outside. They were not that common for students to enter through, but occasionally they would. When I was walking, I saw these 3 guys walk through the doors to enter the school. Right away, I realized that they were all wearing masks, and there were these strange masks covering their entire heads. They were sort of like costume masks, but I couldn't tell what kind of character they were supposed to be. Other than that, the guys were wearing pretty normal clothes. I figured these were costumes because it was nearly Halloween. I think it was like the week of Halloween or maybe the week before. I kind of laughed and shook my head, thinking that they were just being funny for Halloween. We walked past each other in the hallway, but didn't say anything. Then I got to my classroom and went inside. Classes started shortly after. I remember like 20 minutes into class, there was suddenly a lockdown. The teacher told everyone that the school is locked down and that it was not a drill. She turned off the lights, locked the door, and covered the windows. We had to leave our desks and sit on the floor in the back of the classroom. Some kids were quietly whispering and making jokes, and others seemed nervous. I had no idea what the lockdown was for. I just waited along with everybody else. The lockdown ended up lasting for almost an hour. Finally, it ended. The school day went on as normal after that. But when I found out what the lockdown was for, I was shocked. The same guys that wore masks that had passed me in the hallway were not students. They were grown men in their early 20s. After entering the school, they walked around the hallways and then split up, sticking their heads in the window of several classrooms. When a teacher tried to ask who they were, they ran away. They ended up hiding in separate places around the school. The police got called on them, and eventually they were all found. I didn't find out what their intentions were. Maybe it was all just supposed to be a joke after all, but it's sure a creepy thing to do. I used to be a substitute teacher part-time years ago. I did it for a few years and it was cool, but I moved on to a career where I don't have time to do that anymore. But in my time subbing, there was really one moment that I still think about sometimes as being scary. So I had to sub at a school that I had never been to before. I think it was my second year that I worked as a substitute teacher. So I arrived at the school and I didn't know my way around very well, but I was able to find the classroom all right. I was substitute teaching 3 classes that day, all in the same classroom. It was a pretty average-looking high school classroom for the most part. Somewhat old, but there was a teacher's desk at the front with a large whiteboard. A bunch of desks were scattered around the room, and some storage was at the back, with posters scattered around on the wall. So for the first couple of classes, things went by pretty smooth. Like normal, I didn't really have to do any actual teaching. It was more just me giving the students instructions of what they had to do, and then just sitting there and not doing much. After the first 2 classes of the day, there was a break in the action and I had an off period. That meant there was no class in my room, so I was just sitting by myself in it for the hour. During this time, I got up to use the restroom. Now, when I did this, I couldn't find the bathroom at first. The school was kind of hard to navigate around in, as it was pretty old. I walked down a couple of hallways before I finally found a restroom. As I was leaving the bathroom when I was done, I heard an announcement that the school was going into a lockdown. This was concerning to me, but I just figured that I would get back to my room and things would be fine. I had no clue what the lockdown was for, because now that I was back out in the hallways, they seemed completely empty and quiet. I wandered around to get back to my classroom and almost got lost, but thankfully made it. When I got back in the room, I closed the door, locked it, and then turned off the lights. Then I just sat at the main desk and went on my laptop. I was just waiting for the lockdown to hopefully be over soon, and I hoped that it was nothing serious. I tried to do some internet searches to find any information, but could not. And I didn't get any calls on the classroom phone either. So I sat there for a while in silence, curious as to what was going on. This went on for probably half an hour. Then there was a knock on my classroom door, which startled me. I got up and carefully walked over to the door. I saw a police officer standing on the other side. When I saw that, I opened up the door, curious as to what was happening. Immediately, he asked me to come out of the room. Then he told me that they had reason to believe that a suspect they were looking for was in my classroom. There were more police out in the hallway, and they made me leave the area. Later on, everything was cleared, and I was told that they caught the suspect. Then I went back to the classroom and finished my substitute teaching for the day. I found out that there had been a man who had broke into the school, and he was walking down the hallways, which caused the lockdown. I didn't find out why he did this or much else, but apparently when the lockdown was announced, the police got called and stuff, but they didn't know where the man had gone. Well, when I was gone to the bathroom, he walked right into my room because it was empty and I didn't lock the door. When I got back to my room, he was hiding in one of the back storage closets at the back end of the room. I hadn't noticed at all. The school staff and police saw security camera footage in the hallway of him entering the room, so that's how they knew that he was there. I had no idea. I can't believe that I was in a room with that guy for such a long time. The police were able to enter the rooms and eventually get him to come out of there. That was by far the craziest thing that ever happened when I was a substitute teacher. Back when I was in high school, I used to love gym classes. I was not a bad student, but I really wasn't the smartest either, and I didn't particularly enjoy most classes. Gym class was a class where you didn't really have to know much. You could just be physically active and play sports. For this one gym class, I don't recall which one it was, but I was a sophomore in high school. I was in this class with one of my best friends named Adam. We would talk and hang out all the time. At this particular time of the year, we would go outside sometimes for gym as the weather was nice. It was the second period of the day, so it was still pretty early in the morning. One day during gym class, we went outside to the fields behind the school. There was a large area behind the school where all the sports fields were. There was football, baseball, soccer, some practice fields, tennis, and beyond that was a large woods. We were out in one of the open practice fields playing ultimate frisbee or something like that. I remember that in the middle of this, a school lockdown ensued. The teacher blew his whistle and called everybody to the front of the field. There was probably 20 to 30 kids in the class, and just the teacher to look after us. He told us that the school was going into a lockdown, so we would be entering the school and going into the gym and waiting there. So he told everybody to get in line. From where Adam and I were, though, we realized that it would be easy not to go in. We didn't want to go into the school and wait out a lockdown. Who knows how long that would take. Plus, it would be more dangerous to be in the school probably. That was our thinking. Really, we were just being immature kids wanting to get out of class, but we decided to run off and wait out the lockdown outside. When it was over, we could then have a friend let us back in the school during passing time between classes. We obviously didn't think it out too much, and we also obviously weren't too worried about the actual lockdown. We had only had one other one prior to that in our high school careers, and I remember that it was for nothing major, just a minor little thing. So anyways, we got the idea to leave and decided to do it. So when everyone was walking back to the school, we went in the other direction for the woods. We were easily able to get away from the class without our teacher noticing. We ran along the side of the fields and then went into the woods a short ways. The woods there were not huge, but there was a good amount of trees and you could stay hidden pretty easily. We then texted one of our friends who was not in our class but in another one. Adam asked him what the lockdown was for and told him that we were going to hang out outside until it was over. Our friend said that he didn't know, but he just said that there was a lockdown and that was it. He agreed that when it was over and when class was dismissed, he would let us in a back door to the school. That's because all the doors were locked during the day aside from the main front door, and there you had to go by someone. So Adam and I sat on the edge of a tree branch just in the woods and looked back at the school. We went on our phones and talked. I was feeling glad that we were not in the school for the lockdown. We were both wondering what it was for though and how long it would last. Neither of us could ditch school and go home or anything like that because we were both too young to drive still, so we didn't have cars. We also didn't live close enough to the school to walk home. And with it being only second hour, we had to go back for our next class. About 10 minutes into being outside on our own, we heard a number of cars driving down the street in front of the school. That street was normally fairly quiet, as the school was not right on any kind of super busy road. We looked over, and even though it was really far away, we could see part of the street to the left of the school building, and then we could see all the fields right in front of us. I remember noticing about 5 police cars driving really fast down the street headed for the school. That's when I actually got kind of nervous. I thought that maybe the lockdown was for something bad, and not just them being overly safe for something minor like before. I guess I had just assumed that it wasn't really anything bad. We were texting back and forth with our other friend. He still knew nothing though. After all the cop cars arrived, they went to the front of the school, so they were now out of our sight. Probably 1 or 2 minutes later, we saw something else. There was this man that emerged behind the school. I didn't notice if he left through a back door of the school or came around from the side of the building or what. I only really noticed him when he was already behind the school but still really far away from us. Adam saw him as well at about the same time. We didn't recognize him. The man was walking and then picked up the pace and started jogging. He went through the sports practice fields where our gym class had been playing. Then he started jogging straight for us. We ducked down, even though he most likely couldn't see us at all. I'm not sure why, but neither of us ran away. Instead, we hid. We both went behind a large tree that we were near in a small clearing. We got low to the ground and became quiet, so I couldn't see anymore, but I then heard footsteps approaching the woods. That's when I got really nervous. The man then entered the woods right in front of us. He walked to the right to the other side of the tree and then stopped. Adam and I literally held our breath. Then, after what felt like forever but was probably 5 to 10 seconds, the man started walking through the woods past us. His footsteps then got farther and farther away. Adam and I both then got up at once and began running back for the school. We didn't stop until we had made it all the way to the front. We saw police cars and a few officers. They seemed confused as to why we were outside, but we told them what happened. The next thing we knew, we were waiting outside the school with a few officers and school staff. This went on for a while until we were told that it was safe to go back inside and the lockdown was over. It turns out the man was a suspicious person that had been seen in the school. He fled after a staff member saw him, but nobody knew where he went. He left the school and ran into the woods. The cops found him a short time later after we told them where he went. He was only a few blocks away from the woods in a neighborhood behind it. So on one hand, Adam and I learned a valuable lesson to not do dumb stuff like that because it was terrifying. But on the other hand, we kind of helped the police catch the guy. This happened back when I was in high school around 20 years ago. I still remember it pretty well though. So I was in a science class during my sophomore year. It was a pretty typical science classroom that was fairly large with chairs and small desks at them. Then to the right was a large lab area with tables and more chairs. For most of the time we would be sitting at the desks, and then like once a week we would do labs. My assigned seat was at the most far back left seat in the class. There were only 2 other kids in my row of seats, and I was closest to the classroom door which led out to the hallway. I was a pretty good student, but science was not my best subject. Most of the time in class, I found myself very bored and my mind would wander. So on this day, the teacher was teaching and writing on the whiteboard and stuff. I was bored and I wasn't really paying that great of attention. I was supposed to be taking notes, but I remember that I started looking around the room out of boredom. At one point, I looked to the classroom door to my left and to the window. It was one of those doors that has a small vertical window that was skinny and not that big. But when I looked over, I saw a man on the other side looking inside of it. It was a grown adult man who I did not recognize to be a teacher at the school or anything like that. He was staring right into the room, and then his eyes locked onto mine when I looked at him. His eyes were somewhat wide, and it seemed like he must be joking around, but I had no clue who he was. I looked around to the other students, and they were all paying attention to the teacher and didn't notice the guy. And where the teacher was, as well as most of the other students were, you couldn't see the door because there were shelves that blocked the view. So I looked back to the man and he was still there, but then he ducked down and went out of sight. I went back to taking notes and just kind of shrugged it off. But it still seemed like a really weird thing, and I wasn't really sure why the guy did that. but I was still under the impression overall that it was a harmless prank. Sometime later, maybe 10 minutes, the man returned. I'd been looking over to the window periodically. Number one, I wanted to see if the guy would come back, and number two, I was bored. When he returned, he just started to stare at me. I looked at him for an uncomfortable amount of time and then looked away. When I looked back again a short time later, he was still there. I thought about alerting someone but elected not to. At the time, as weird as the guy was and borderline creepy, I didn't want to talk in front of the whole class. It would be disrupting to the teacher's lesson, so I didn't say anything. A short time later, the man was gone again. I went back to trying to pay attention to the teacher. Now, literally 5 minutes later, a sound came over the school intercom. Our teacher then announced that the school was being locked down. She turned off the lights and instructed us to get on the floor and under our desks. Then she went over and locked the classroom door. I started thinking about the man and wondering if he was the cause for the lockdown. I was also afraid that he would come back to the classroom. I remember some of the other students whispering to each other, and I told some about the guy. Nobody seemed to know exactly what the lockdown was for, though. It lasted for about 45 minutes, which felt very long. Then finally, it was lifted. We were able to resume with our school day. At first, nobody would say what the lockdown was for, but by the end of the day, the word had spread and I found out. An adult man had actually been stalking a girl who was in my class. He followed her to the school and entered the building and hid inside. It was the same guy who I had seen looking into the classroom. The man was also on drugs, and he was arrested by the police when they found him hiding in the school. It was a big relief for everyone that he was caught. The girl in my class was not even aware of him following her. It's crazy to me that I saw him, and I thought it was just some guy joking around at first. I'm really glad that he didn't try to enter our classroom. I'm a dad of two, and this is something that happened when my daughter was a freshman in high school. She attended a pretty average-sized school. In her freshman year, she would ride the bus most of the time. Occasionally, with my work schedule, I was able to drive her to or from school sometimes, because my hours were a little bit all over the place. So one day, my daughter had a project for one of her classes that she forgot at home, sadly. I knew that the class she needed it for was one of the later periods of the day, so I decided to drive to the high school and drop it off for her because I didn't have to work that day. It was probably a couple of hours after the school day started when I drove there. After arriving at the school, I parked in the lot out front and then went in the main doors in the front of the school. They were the only two doors that were unlocked during the school day. When I arrived, there was a woman sitting in a small office who asked who I was and stuff. After showing her my ID and verifying who my daughter was, she let me in and said that I could give her the project. I wasn't really sure where to go when I got inside the school, though. I didn't know where my daughter's locker was, and I didn't know where any of the classrooms were either. And class was in session, so all the hallways were completely empty. I thought about walking to whatever class she was in and embarrassing her, but I thought better of it. I just started walking around the hallways, trying to look for maybe a teacher or something. Then I happened to see a student walking down the hallway. I took a chance and asked her if she happened to know my daughter. I couldn't believe it when she said yes and that they had a class together. I gave her the class project and asked if she could give it to my daughter, and she said yes. So at that point, I decided to go back and leave. As I was making my way back through the halls, I heard over the school speakers an announcement. I didn't hear the first part because the speakers were hard to understand, but I did hear the word lockdown. For some reason, I assumed that it was a drill. I don't recall if I thought I heard the word drill, or if for whatever reason that's just what I thought. But I was approaching some doors at that point and decided to just leave. So I walked to them and then went outside. These were not the same doors that I had entered the school through, though. Like I said, I didn't really know my way around there, so I just started walking outside around the school to get back to my car. As I was doing this, I saw some random guy come walking in my direction. When he saw me, at first he walked right by. Then, as I walked through the parking lot towards my car, he must have turned around, because the next thing I knew, when I was almost at my car, I felt a tap on the shoulder. I turned around to see the same guy there. He asked if I could give him a ride. When I saw the guy, he gave me a bad feeling. Something about him seemed sketchy, so I said no. I told the guy I couldn't do it. He asked again. I told him that I really had to be going. He didn't say anything. I just got into my car and left, driving right away from him. After getting back home, my daughter texted me that the school was in a lockdown. I asked her why, and she didn't know. I decided to drive back to the school at that point. I was actually thinking that maybe I had caused the lockdown because maybe somebody saw me wandering the hallways. Also, if there was actual danger there, I wanted to go and see if I could pick up my daughter from school. However, when I got there, I saw several police cars out front. I was not allowed to go near the school. After a while, the lockdown ended and the school day resumed. I found out that it was caused by a suspicious man. Not me, but the guy who had asked me for a ride. Apparently, he had been inside the school and was talking to multiple students. He was reported and then left the school. He was asking me to be his getaway driver without me even realizing. I'm really glad that I didn't give him a ride. When I was a senior in high school, I spent one of my class's first semester as a teacher's assistant for a history teacher in the school. It was a teacher who I really liked and I had had in the past. I would help with any tasks that she needed me to do, which oftentimes was grading papers. I would only have to grade the easy ones, which were assignments with definitive answers, so I didn't have to make judgment calls. It was easy work, but it just took a while. The classroom was sort of at one far end of the school where things were a lot quieter. One day, the teacher gave me a big stack of assignments to grade, and the class was going to the computer lab for the entire period. So I was told that I could stay in the classroom and work if I wanted to. I chose to do so as there was more space, it would be quieter, and I could also slack off more if I wanted. So they left and it was just me alone in the giant classroom. I sat at a random desk and got to work grading assignments. Maybe 20 minutes into the class period and I heard this sound over the intercom. It was followed by an announcement that the school was being locked down and this was not a drill. This was an interesting situation for me to be in because I was all by myself in this classroom. I thought about if I should go back to the computer lab or not, but I figured that I shouldn't. I didn't have keys with me or anything, and they might lock the doors. Plus, I wouldn't be able to lock this classroom if I left it. So instead, I walked up to the front of the room, locked the door from the inside, and then turned out the lights. I knew to do those things from the drills that we had had. I was wondering obviously what the lockdown was for, and I really had no idea. So I sat back down at the desk and waited. I texted with some friends, but nobody seemed to know what was happening. After like 10 minutes, I got kind of bored, so I moved to a desk in the back because there was a small lamp that was by it. That way I could keep working without turning all the lights on. So I moved back there and continued to grade assignments. This went on for about another 10 minutes or so. It was very quiet there with nobody else around and nothing going on. Out of nowhere, I heard somebody try opening the classroom door. It was quiet and it made me stop what I was doing. At first, I thought that I was just imagining it because it was so quiet. I listened to hear if it would happen again. At first, there was nothing. Then, maybe 30 seconds later, I heard it again. Then again. Somebody was now trying to open the door over and over, which was locked. This went on for a good 30 seconds to a minute. I was too creeped out to get up and see who was there. The sounds eventually stopped, and things were quiet for another maybe 30 seconds. I was about to get up, but then I heard a quiet knocking on the door to the classroom. It was a very soft knock, and it creeped me out even more. They just knocked once, though. I thought that there was a chance that maybe it was the teacher or a student that was in the class, but I didn't know why they would be out in the hallway at this time. I walked over to the door and then moved the shade to look out the small window. I saw no one. Then I actually unlocked and opened the classroom door to look out into the hallway. When I did, nobody was there. I went back into the classroom and locked the door again. Then I sat back down and continued grading papers. There were no more knocks on the door or anything, but I was really creeped out for the rest of the time. The lockdown ended up going for another 30 minutes or so, and then it was over. The class was let out from the computer lab, and I went on with the school day. I tried to figure out what the lockdown was for, but I never got an answer from anyone. Everyone I asked either didn't know or said different things, so I can't confirm as to what was going on. I still don't know who it was trying to enter the room. Was it the person who caused the lockdown, or was it another student or something like that? Either way, it was really creepy. I'm a school teacher, and this is the story of something that happened a few years ago. Looking back, I feel bad about what happened, and I wish I had done a better job handling the situation, but I've learned from my mistakes. So, I was teaching second period English class, and I had a class of about 20 students in it. My room is on the upper level of the school and about halfway down a hallway. This class in particular was mostly juniors and seniors and was a well-behaved class. So I was teaching the class and then was going to give them some time to work on an assignment. After I started to let them work, I realized that I needed to get more worksheets and had run out. So down the hallway from my classroom there was a printer in the teacher's lounge, and I told the class that I would print off some more. I would only be gone for a few minutes and then I left. I went down the hallway and then logged onto the computer in the lounge and found the assignment and started printing them. I was the only one in the lounge at this time. After being gone for maybe 4 or 5 minutes, I heard this sound come over the school intercom. At first, I didn't know what it was, but then I realized that it was a lockdown announcement. As soon as I heard this, I remembered my students. I knew that I needed to get back to the classroom immediately, and I quickly left the teacher's lounge. I literally started running down the hallway to get back to my classroom. When I got there, I tried to open the door, but it was locked. I was very confused and didn't know why. Soon though, I figured that the students were maybe following lockdown protocol and had locked the door. I started knocking on the door and tried looking in the window, but could only see the front part of the classroom, which was empty. Still, nobody was answering. I didn't know why, and after knocking a few more times, I called out, announcing myself. Then I saw some guy come into view who I did not recognize. This was no student, but a grown man. He looked at me and then moved out of sight. Just after that, I heard a voice at the end of the hallway. It was one of my students. He yelled my name and said that I should get away from the classroom. I went over to him at the end of the hallway and asked what on earth was going on. My student told me that while they were in the classroom, some random guy just entered out of nowhere. He demanded everybody get out of the room immediately, so they did. All the students basically ran away, and the school quickly went into a lockdown. All this took place while I was printing papers, and I was completely unaware. The students had gone to other classrooms to take cover during the lockdown, so I went with the student to another nearby teacher's classroom. Meanwhile, police entered the school as well, and were able to locate the man who was still inside of my classroom. He locked himself in and tried barricading himself inside by blocking the door. Eventually, though, the police were able to get him to come out. I don't really know what his intentions were. I felt terrible for leaving my students and then the man entering the room. Since that happened, I've never left students alone in a classroom. I was a student in high school a long time ago, but I still remember one particularly scary moment that happened, and I remember it very well, like it just happened yesterday. So it was a pretty normal school day. I was a junior at the time and had got to school and then went to my classes. This was the 3rd hour class of the day, which was history, I recall. The classroom was on the 2nd floor of the school, and personally I liked it because we would watch a lot of videos there. The classroom also had these carpet floors, which I liked. But anyways, I remember that during class, the teacher said that there was a lockdown. Class was probably about halfway through at that point, and I remember wondering what the lockdown was about. It seemed to come out of nowhere. I don't recall hearing any announcement on the intercom or anything of that nature. So I remember that the teacher said that we all had to sit at the back of the class. The desks that we had could easily be moved, so everybody just ended up moving their desks towards the back, far away from the door. I sat on the side of the room kind of towards the back near the door, so I moved my desk back a little ways. So we all moved to the back end of the room, and then the teacher locked the door and turned off the lights. Most of us were obviously wondering what the lockdown was for, and we asked the teacher, but he said that he didn't know. So as we were sitting there for a while, some of us kids started to get bored, but I think we were also a little bit nervous as well. Then, suddenly, everything was interrupted by very loud bangs coming from the classroom door. We all looked to the door at once. The small window there was covered though. You could sort of see a shadow of somebody on the other side, but not very well at all. Not enough to tell any details about them, like if it was a man, a woman, or if they were large or small. Just enough to really tell that somebody was there on the other side. And these bangs on the door, they were not just a knock or anything like that. It was like this person was trying to break down the door or something. There were about 4 or 5 of these really loud bangs. I know that when I heard it, I was terrified. After the loud noises though, they stopped and the shadow left the doorway. Everybody in the classroom was dead silent. That silence continued for about 30 seconds, but it was only broken by more very loud bangs, this time coming from the wall on the other side of the classroom. It was like whoever was in the hallway simply moved locations. They banged there a few times, and then it went silent again. The class got eerily silent, with nobody talking at all, not even the teacher. Things were quiet for several minutes then. Finally, some people started quietly talking again, but it wasn't normal conversation. It was just talk trying to figure out what was possibly going on. Then, like 5 minutes after that, the loud bangs came back to the door, as whoever was doing it was back. They went on longer this time. There was like 10 of these very loud bangs on the door. I was scared that the door was going to break, but it held up well. Then the noises stopped, and things went dead silent again after that. We were all terrified. For the next 20 or 30 minutes, I'm telling you, nobody said a word. You could hear a pin drop in that classroom. Then, all of a sudden, the phone rang in the classroom. The teacher answered it and didn't stay on the line for very long before hanging up. He then announced to us that the lockdown was over and assured us all that we were safe. I think everybody breathed a sigh of relief at the same time. Some of the students asked what happened at that point, but the teacher said he didn't know and they didn't tell him. We were all very curious. For the rest of the school day, things resumed to normal, but everyone was a little shook up from the craziness. However, I asked a bunch of people and nobody knew what happened. Over the next few days and weeks, there was nothing on the news or in the papers or anything. Nobody ever seemed to find out what the lockdown was about or what happened. I still don't know. Was it some intruder or an angry student or what? I'm not sure, but I know that it was a really scary experience.
This is something that took place back during my senior year of high school. During that year, I noticed that many of the teachers were more relaxed than when we were freshmen. They seemed more strict back then. My first hour class of the day was psychology. It was an elective class at my high school, and the teacher was not very strict at all. You could sit wherever you wanted, and if people showed up a minute or two late, he never counted them as late. This was nice for me, because there were a couple of times when I walked in like 30 seconds to a minute after the bell. The teacher would usually just casually talk with the students for the first few minutes. So one day I was running a little bit late, which was not uncommon. School started at 7:30 a.m., so I would get up at around 7 and then leave for school at about 7:15. It took a little bit less than 10 minutes to drive there, but I had to park kind of far away. There were so many people that went to my school that the parking lot I was in was about a 5-minute walk from the actual building. So on this day, I arrived at the school parking lot and it was already 7:27. So I was later than usual and I had to walk really fast to get to the school on time. Pretty much everybody was already inside and I didn't see any other students out in the parking lot. After walking about as fast as I could, I saw that it was 7:30 and I was still walking. I was happy that my teacher probably wouldn't care too much if I walked in maybe 3 or 4 minutes late. So I got to the school doors at about 7:31, but when I tried them, they were locked. This was strange because I was at the main doors and they were always supposed to be unlocked. I looked inside and it looked completely empty, which was not that surprising considering classes had started. I walked down to another door and tried that one. This was also locked. At that point, I didn't really know what to do. I decided to just keep going down to doors and trying them. So I tried another door, which was also locked. Then I went down to the next. By now, I was approaching an area that was completely behind the school. I was very confused as to why each door was locked. As I was walking behind the school, something caught my eye to the left. I looked over, and I saw this guy jumping out of a window to a classroom. He was a full-grown adult, and I did not recognize him. It was just really strange to see a man jumping out of the school window. After he got out of the window, he appeared to look over at me. I kind of looked away, continuing walking to the next door. The guy was a couple 100 feet away at least. When I made my way down to the next doors, I found that these were also locked. At that point, I looked over again, and I saw that the man was walking towards me. The way that he was cutting through the grass gave me kind of a bad feeling. I knew something was up, because after all, he had just climbed out of a window. I was really more confused than anything though. Plus, it was early in the morning and I had only woken up less than an hour before. I turned and I started to walk away from the man. I didn't really know where else to go. I had tried almost every door and it seemed they would all be locked. As I kept walking though, I started to hear what sounded like the man walking faster and approaching me. I looked over my shoulder and I saw that the man was much closer now. I had a really bad feeling about this, and I decided to just go back to my car. I was not that far away from it now, so I turned and I started walking in the direction of it. I also picked up my pace.
After doing so, I noticed that the man changed his direction as well, and he was walking after me still. He was less than 100 feet away from me now though, but still a good distance. I walked even faster. I was able to make it down to my car. Right before unlocking it, I looked behind me. The man was within 50 feet of me. I quickly went to my car and got inside of it. Then I started it up and left as fast as possible. When I did, the man had reached the parking lot. He looked at me, but I was driving away. I didn't really know where to go, so I just went back to my parents' house. If they asked me anything, I would just say that I was at the school but it was locked and I couldn't get in, and then some sketchy guy was following me. So I drove back home, and when I arrived, my mom was still there and hadn't left for work yet. As soon as I got inside, she told me that she had heard my school was in a lockdown. I realized that explained a lot. I told her about what happened to me, and she was really glad that I was okay. Then she called my school and had me tell them what happened. I found out that the police were at my school and searching for the man. I was excused from school for the rest of the day and able to stay home. The school remained locked down until about an hour later, when the man was located and apprehended by local police. I'm not sure why he was in the school, but he had walked in before classes had started. At some point, either just as school was starting or just before, the place was locked down. I had gotten there afterwards, which is why every door to the building was locked. I guess the guy had found an empty classroom which was open and left through the window. Why he followed me, I do not know. I'm really glad that I got away from him though. The rest of the day I played video games at home and it was a great time. That was the only lockdown we had in my high school career.
Back when I was in high school, I remember that my friends and I found this secret room inside of the school. The room wasn't actually hidden or anything, but it was a classroom that was no longer used. Now it was vacant and just stored a bunch of random stuff in it. You see, the school that I went to was pretty old, but it had been renovated several times. This caused the overall layout to be somewhat strange, and this classroom was in the corner of a normally quiet hallway. It was not in an area that would normally get a lot of foot traffic. My friend Michael was the one that originally found it. I'm not sure how, but I guess he must have just been curious and tried opening the door. Apparently the lock on the door didn't work, so it would just open. So Michael, me, and two other friends are the ones who knew about it. We had a bit of a friend group, and we went in and it was interesting to see all the stuff in there. It had some things from over 10 years ago, such as old assignments from various teachers and old equipment. There were box TVs that were on those stands with wheels, and old whiteboards as well. The room also had desks scattered about, and tons of books. It was quite cluttered, and had carpeted floors as well. So my friends and I would occasionally go into the room and hang out before school, between classes, during lunch, or other random times. It was just our secret hangout spot for the friend group. We were certain that nobody knew we were in there, and we made sure that nobody was looking whenever we went in, which was pretty easy. So one day, in between classes, I went there with 3 other friends. It was right before our last class of the day. Michael had told us to meet there in our friend group chat. He wanted to talk about some plans to hang out and play basketball over the weekend. So I remember that everybody left to go to their classes, except for me and Michael, because we had a class together and it was really close by. We were still sitting at desks and talking when we heard this sound come over the school intercom. It was strange because I didn't know what it was about, but shortly after, we heard this announcement that the school was being locked down. In my time in high school to that point, we had never had a lockdown before. I didn't really know what the reason for it was, but I was a little bit nervous. Obviously, in a lockdown, you're supposed to go to the nearest classroom and nobody's allowed to be in the hallways. Michael and I thought about walking to our classroom, but then decided to just stay in the room that we were in. I mean, we were in a classroom after all, and nobody probably even knew that we were here. There had been lockdown drills at the school before, so we knew the basics of what you're supposed to do. Turn the lights out in the classroom and lock the door. There was a cover already over the small window in the door to this classroom, so whether the light was on or off, you really couldn't tell from the hallway. So we left it on, and then I went to try to lock the door. However, I remembered that the lock on the door seemed to be broken. I mean, that's how we were able to get in the room in the first place. We figured that that wasn't a big deal though. So Michael and I just sat in random desks in the room, talked and went on our phones, and waited for the lockdown to be over. Neither of us had any idea as to what it was for. Other than us, things were very quiet. We texted some friends trying to figure out what was happening, but nobody seemed to know. Then, I would say about 15 minutes into the lockdown, we heard footsteps approaching in the hallway. I was sitting not too far away from the door, so I quickly got up and turned the light off, just in case it was visible at all from the outside. The footsteps continued to get closer, and Michael and I got really concerned. We probably weren't supposed to be in here in the first place, so whoever this was, if they came into the room, we had to hide. Very quickly, we decided to just find a hiding place. Now, there was so much junk in the room that it really wasn't too hard to find a hiding spot. Michael and I took about 10 seconds to get in our places. He went in the far corner of the room behind a cabinet, and I hid on the ground to the side of the desk. The classroom was also very dark, so it would not be obvious where we were. Then, just moments after hiding, the footsteps reached right outside of the door. The doorknob turned and the door opened. Then we heard somebody entering. I looked up from where I was. I saw this man walk in, but I couldn't really tell what he looked like because of how dark it was. I was confident that he couldn't see me though. When the guy got inside of the room, he closed the door quietly, then stood just inside of the entrance. After a few seconds, he took a few steps into the room. Michael and I were both trying to be as quiet as we possibly could. I literally held my breath for a while before breathing as quietly as possible. The man was just standing around a few feet inside the room for a while. This went on for maybe 5 minutes. I wasn't sure who this guy was, if he worked for the school, or if he was possibly the cause of the lockdown. He didn't really seem like a teacher, and I didn't know why he would enter this room, so I was starting to think that it was the latter. Then, out of nowhere, Michael made a sound. I think that he just moved slightly. I'm not sure why, but you could just barely hear it because of how quiet it was. When this happened, I heard the man in the room suddenly move a little bit. Then he spoke. The guy said, "What was that? Is somebody in here?" My heart started beating like crazy, but I didn't move or make a sound. Michael did the same. After a few moments of silence, the man called out again, asking who was there. He sounded aggravated and even kind of nervous. Then he shouted, asking if anybody was inside of the room. Michael and I did not make a peep. Then we heard the man quickly walk to the doorway, and the door opened up seconds later. Then the man left. I let out a huge sigh of relief, and I'm sure that Michael did the same. We stayed in our hiding places for a while though, just in case the man were to come back. Probably about 20 minutes later, there was an announcement that the lockdown was over. We felt much better. We then left the classroom and went to our final class of the day. Later after school, we were able to find out that the lockdown was caused by a suspicious man inside of the school. Based on what I heard, I'm 100% certain that the man that entered the classroom we were in was the same guy. He must have been trying to find a place to hide, and we were already in there. Apparently, Michael must have scared him off. I'm really glad that the guy didn't try to find us or anything, and just left.
A crazy thing happened one time regarding a lockdown when I was in high school. It was during my junior year, I believe. So I remember that I was sitting in class one day. I don't remember a lot about the day prior to that, but I think that it had gone pretty normal. I do not recall anything strange or unusual happening. But when I was in class, all of a sudden there was a lockdown. The teacher stopped class, locked the doors, and turned out the lights. We were not told why there was a lockdown or what it was about. Some kids asked, but the teacher didn't say. So we all just had to sit there and wait in the dark. Some kids started talking, but we all kept our volumes of conversations pretty low. During this time, my cell phone started ringing. I looked and I did not recognize the number. Possibly from being bored during the lockdown, I decided to answer it. When I did, at first I heard nothing but static. My volume was also pretty low because I was in class, so it was hard to hear, but I had the phone up to my ear and I was listening. I asked who was calling me. Then I heard a man's voice. I don't remember his exact words, but he said something like, "I'm in your school and they're chasing me. I'm leaving now and I'm going to your house instead." I was so confused that I didn't even know what to say. After claiming he was going to my house, the phone hung up. I then put the phone down and it took me a minute to compute the conversation that I had just had. Finally, I started putting the pieces together. If this guy was in my school and they were chasing him, he was likely the reason that we were having a lockdown. But who was this guy and how did he get my number? And why did he say he was going to my house? Maybe he knew where I lived. I sat there thinking about the conversation for like 5 minutes. Finally, I decided to report it. I walked up to my teacher and told her what happened. She then called the principal's office. After that, I had to talk on the phone with someone from the principal's office briefly. Then the lockdown went for maybe 30 more minutes. When it was over, I didn't get a clear answer as to what was going on or anything. I just went on with the rest of the school day confused as can be. But I remember in my last class of the day, I got pulled out of it and told to go to the principal's office. Then they told me what happened. They said that a man was in the school who did not have any identification or reason for being there. He ran when questioned and the school was locked down. The police got called, but they couldn't find him in the building and thought that he had left. Then, after I reported the phone call, they went to my house. They found him hiding out on the edge of our property in the woods. We had a pretty big yard, and there was a lot of trees and woods back there. So the phone call that I got was from some creepy guy that was apparently stalking me or something. The crazy thing is I had no idea about the guy before this. I don't know how he got my number, how he knew where I lived, or anything. It really freaked me out when I realized that he probably followed me before without me noticing or something. I'm just glad that he was caught. I'm a teacher at a high school, and this is my scariest experience from my time on the job. It happened in just my second year of teaching full-time. I had been hired at a high school nearby to where I had grown up. I was really happy to get the job, and the first year had gone well. Most of the students at the school were pretty good. There were a few that were not though, but I feel like most schools that size have them. One day, I was teaching class like any other. After first period was over, in between classes, I would check my cell phone. As I was doing so, I saw that I was receiving a call from an unknown number. I didn't know who it was, so I didn't bother to answer. I put my phone back down on the desk and then prepared for the second class of the day. After teaching that class, I checked my phone again and then saw that the number had left a voicemail. I decided to listen to it. When I played the message, it was what sounded like a younger male's voice, and they were talking in almost a whisper. It was creepy, and the voice simply said, "Answer my calls." Then, literally moments later, the phone started ringing again. Taking the unknown caller's advice, I decided to answer. When I did, I heard that same voice again. He said, "I'm inside the school and I'm gonna get you." Then he hung up. I was really creeped out by this. I didn't know if he was serious or not, but being a new teacher, I felt like I should report it. So I called the principal and let him know about the threat made against me. The principal said that the matter would be looked into immediately. A short time later, a lockdown was announced. I followed through with the procedure for my classroom, and a few minutes after that, there was a knock on the door. Thankfully, it was one of the school staff members to ask me some questions. They talked to me in the room quietly, asking me what happened and stuff. Then they left and said that they were searching the school. The lockdown lasted for about an hour. When it was finally lifted, I was told that nobody suspicious was found inside the school and they thought that I was safe. And for the rest of the day, I was. Nothing strange or creepy happened and I had no more texts or calls. After school, I did some grading and some preparations for the following school day. Then I went home. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment by myself at the time. That night, shortly before I was going to go to bed, there was a really loud knocking on my front door. I was really freaked out immediately. I remembered the threat that I had received at school. Now somebody was at my house. Whoever was there did not knock a second time. After a minute or so, I very carefully got up and walked over to the door. When I looked through the peephole, nobody was there. Whoever had done it must have left. I was really on edge and thought about calling the police, but I decided not to. I was on high alert for the rest of the night, but nothing else happened. It was tough to fall asleep, but eventually I was able to. The next day at school, I found out that the mystery had been solved. The number that I had received calls from had been traced to one of my students. He was a guy who hadn't shown up to class in weeks. I'm not sure if it was a prank or if he was serious, but he was kind of a troublemaker and hung out with a bad crowd. He had already been suspended multiple times and was suspended again for that. The really creepy part is that I'm sure it was him who showed up at my apartment. I have no clue how he got my number or address. Did he follow me home? That might explain the apartment, but still not the phone number. He was never in my class again, as he got expelled shortly after for selling drugs on school grounds. I'm glad that I never saw him again after that. I used to work as a custodian at a high school. It was a fairly average-sized school. I was the overnight custodian and would be by myself for a majority of the shift. During the school days, there would generally be 2 or even 3 working at a time. That's because during the day there were more tasks to be done. Overnights, things still needed to be done, but I would be the only person in the building, plus many of the earlier tasks had been completed. So I would start at 10 p.m. and get off at 6 a.m., a true overnight shift. Most of the time I would be alone, but I didn't mind. I preferred it because I'm a bit of an introvert, and I found it to be more relaxing to work by myself most of the time. So on this one night, I was in the hallways in the north wing of the school. I was just mopping the floors, and out of nowhere I heard a lockdown announcement, which made no sense. I heard the beep come over the school intercom and then heard the announcement. The only explanation to me that made sense was that it was some kind of a mistake. I thought that I was the only person in the entire school, so how could there be a lockdown? And what would it even be for? Maybe the intercom system had malfunctioned or something. I thought that I would go over there as soon as I finished mopping the area that I was in. However, as I was finishing, I heard it again for a second time. Now I was really thinking something must be wrong over there. The intercom system was controlled from the main offices of the school. I stopped mopping and then started to walk over there. It was a ways away, but as I was walking in that direction, I did not hear anything else, until I got much closer. As I approached the offices, I heard footsteps. They were not within my sight and kind of far away. I couldn't tell exactly where they were coming from. I also didn't know where they were going, but they were not that close to me. I thought that maybe somebody was in the school that I didn't know about, perhaps another faculty member. However, when I reached the offices, all the lights were off and everything was quiet. I went inside and turned on the lights. Everything seemed fine. Personally, I didn't really know much about how the intercom worked. That wasn't really my department, but nothing seemed out of place or broken. Nothing seemed like it had been messed with either. And I hadn't heard a lockdown announcement in a while now. So by this point, I was very confused. Then I heard the footsteps again, still really far away. In my mind at the moment, I felt that the footsteps had to be related to the lockdown announcement. Maybe somebody was here working on it without my knowledge. I was supposed to know if anybody else would be working in the school overnight, but I wasn't told anything. I mean, there were a few times when a sports game or something ran late, or a team arrived back late from an away game. Then sometimes people would linger around until after midnight, but never this late, and I had not seen anybody else. There were also no late sports games or events that night. So I called out asking if anybody was there. I yelled pretty loud, but not in an angry tone or anything. I didn't hear anything in response. However, I did hear the footsteps seemingly going farther away. I walked in that direction for a while. I couldn't tell exactly where they were coming from though. I'm not going to lie, I was feeling creeped out. However, I was really curious as to who was in the school. After walking around the school for like 10 minutes, I didn't hear or see anything else. I turned around and went back to where I originally was. When I got back to my mop, there was suddenly another announcement. It was a beep of the intercom, followed by an announcement that the lockdown was now over. This creeped me out so much that I literally took off running for the offices. When I got there, I didn't see anybody. The lights were still off and the doors were still closed and locked. I went in and looked around anyways. There was nothing in there, and when I got out, I walked up and down a bunch of random hallways, calling out, demanding to know if anybody was there. But I got no response, and I didn't see or hear anybody at all. I didn't hear any more footsteps or anything. I did the rest of my tasks that night a little bit on edge and feeling nervous of what could happen. But there were no more lockdown announcements or footsteps. When the next custodians arrived at about 5:30 a.m., I told them of what happened. We searched the entire school up and down, but didn't see anyone or find any trace of anyone either. They said they would brief the principal and staff of what happened overnight for me because I left at 6 a.m. After that night, I never heard anything more of it other than that nobody was ever located, and nothing else like that ever happened again in my time working there. This is still something that makes me wonder. Somebody was definitely in the school that night. I heard the footsteps, but why was there a lockdown announcement? I don't know. It was really weird. This happened a few years ago. I played baseball in high school and college as well. After finishing college, my first job was working at a gym. I was also offered the position of head coach of the freshman baseball team for the nearby high school. Somebody at the gym was a teacher at the school and found out that I played baseball in college and stuff. The high school had 3 levels of baseball: the freshman team, the junior varsity team, and then varsity. The freshman team is really just about developing players because there's no playoffs for their season. The coaching staff for the freshman team is also very small, with me being the only coach. The junior varsity and varsity teams have more coaches. My first year doing it, my team was 18 players, obviously all freshmen. So one day I drove to the school to get ready for practice. School got let out at 2:45 p.m. and practice would be at 3 o'clock and we would meet in the locker room. I arrived at the school at about 2:15 or so. After going inside, I walked down the hallways towards the locker rooms. The high school was probably average sized. The locker rooms were kind of at one end of the school and connected to the gyms and basketball courts. So I walked into the locker room and went into the very small office space in there. The locker room itself was very large. It was used for football, basketball, and baseball, and all the players from freshman to varsity used it, except for football where it was just varsity. So there were a ton of lockers in there and the space was decent. I was going over the practice plan and doing some preparations. During this time, I was the only person in there because school was obviously still in session. But the entire varsity coaching staff were also school teachers during the day, and I think the JV coaches there were as well. So after I was in there for maybe 15 or 20 minutes, I heard that there was a lockdown over the loudspeakers. This was strange, and I obviously wondered what the reason for it was. But there wasn't really anything that I could do. I just hoped that the lockdown would be over by the time practice was supposed to start. Overall, I just continued with my work. The doors to the locker room automatically locked, and they were pretty heavy-duty doors, so I wasn't very concerned. About 5 minutes later, though, I heard a loud knocking on the locker room door. There were 2 entrances to the locker room. One was the door connecting to the basketball gym, and the other was the door connecting to the hallway, and that's where the knocking was coming from. Obviously, I didn't know who it could be, but I thought that maybe it was another coach or possibly a player, so I decided to go over there and see. It took a few seconds to walk out of the office and over to the door, so when I got there and opened it, I didn't see anybody. I looked out into the hallway, but saw nothing. I was confused, but figured whoever had knocked had walked away, so I just closed the door and then went back into the locker room. After going back into the office, I heard the banging on the door one more time, but then it stopped. I didn't get up to look again. I thought that maybe this could be related to the lockdown. I had looked, but when I did, nobody was there, so at that point I just kept waiting. However, maybe 10 minutes later, I heard another sound. It was really weird because it wasn't a banging, but I heard an unknown sound coming from sort of above me but a ways away. I thought that maybe it was on the 2nd floor, but then I realized that the 2nd floor didn't cover this area of the school. The noise got louder and closer to me. Then I saw one of the ceiling tiles start to move about 30 feet away from me in the locker room. I quickly realized that someone was in the ceiling. The tile got removed and this random guy jumped down into the locker room. Immediately we looked at each other. He seemed surprised to see me, but I think that I was definitely more surprised to see him. How often do you see a random guy fall out of the ceiling? He got up and I got up as well. Neither of us said anything. Then the guy ran for the door connecting to the basketball gyms and left. I went to the office, took the phone there, and called the principal's office. I reported what happened and didn't expect them to believe me. But I found out that the guy who I had seen was a suspicious man in the school and he was the reason for the lockdown. The police were also looking for him. I was glad that he left the locker room. The lockdown lasted for another 10 minutes or so, then it ended. School resumed and then was let out shortly after. I found out later on that the man had wanted to hide in the locker room because he thought it was empty. He also knew that the doors locked. What I don't think he knew was that there was practice after school. He had entered a storage closet and climbed into the ceiling from there. Then he simply crawled next door to the locker room. I think the guy was crazy, but I'm glad they found him and that he didn't cause any harm.
I remember back in my junior year of high school, we went on a field trip for one of my classes. This was a field trip that took up 2 entire school days. We had gone to an amusement park for a science class, which was a lot of fun. I also missed a test for another one of my classes, but luckily my teacher was cool and let me make it up. So we scheduled a time after school the next day for me to make up the test. It was for Spanish class, and the classroom was towards the end of one hallway on the north side of the building. When I got out of school, I walked over to the Spanish classrooms. My teacher, Mr. Jordan, was in the classroom, and a couple of other students were there as well. I'm not sure what exactly the other students were doing there. I think they might have been making up an assignment or something like that. Mr. Jordan handed me the test when I got there, and he told me that I could take the test in another room. He said the students were going to be talking to him in his classroom, and he didn't want them to distract me. So he had gotten a key to a nearby Spanish classroom of Mrs. Aceves and said that I could take the test there. So we walked over to the classroom of Mrs. Aceves, and she was already gone for the day. Mr. Jordan told me that he would be in his room if I needed anything. Then he told me good luck and left. I sat down at a random desk and then started the exam. Spanish was a class that I was decent at, but I wasn't expecting to ace the test or anything. However, as I went on with it, things were going really well. I was feeling confident about my answers until when I was almost done, I heard suddenly the school was having a lockdown. Of course, this was strange, partly because it was after school hours. I didn't know that schools had lockdowns when school wasn't in session, but I guess it makes sense. So anyways, I didn't really know what to do. I could stay there in Mrs. Aceves' classroom, or I could try to go back to Mr. Jordan's room, which was just around the corner. After debating it for a moment or two, I decided to go back to Mr. Jordan's room, so I got up and left the classroom. Mr. Jordan's room was literally right around the corner, like 50 feet away. There was only one classroom separating the two. So after I got out into the hallway, I walked over to Mr. Jordan's room. When I got there, I tried opening the door, but it was locked. I was expecting him to come over and open up the door, but literally right after I tried opening it, I heard a noise behind me. It was footsteps, and somebody was walking from around the corner past Mrs. Aceves' room. It was some random woman who was clearly not a student or a teacher. She had really messed up hair, and I just knew right then that this lockdown must have been caused by her. The woman started just walking towards me. Without any more time to wait for Mr. Jordan, I started walking away farther up the hallway. When I did, I saw the woman start to walk after me. She was really creeping me out, and I had no idea what she was doing here. As I walked through the hallway, it was completely silent and nobody else was around. I started walking faster, but could hear the woman still behind me. I turned and went into another hallway, and the woman followed. I was continuing to walk faster and faster, and the woman was doing the same. I didn't want to know what would happen if she caught up with me, so I kept going down one hallway after another. The woman was keeping up with me no matter what I did. I didn't want to risk stopping and trying to go to a classroom because I didn't know which teachers were still at school, and basically all the doors were closed as well. So I kept going. Soon, I made it all the way to the front end of the school. I saw the front doors and I went for them. When I made it outside of the school, the woman did not leave after me, and she stayed inside. After that, I just ran for my car and went home. I learned later on that the woman was in fact the cause of the lockdown. I'm not sure what she did, but the police were called for her and the school was locked down. Except the police showed up at the entrance that the woman was seen by, which was not the main entrance that I left out of. I guess Mr. Jordan was literally walking to the door to unlock it when I walked away. He let me finish the test the following day after school, and I'm really glad that the woman never caught up with me.
When I was in high school during my junior year, I took an elective advanced computer class. It was not a very popular class and only had 5 students in it total. I was one of the 5, and our teacher was a really chill guy who was also the head basketball coach. My school had a really good basketball team, and he was always talking basketball and talking to the other coaches. We were all pretty good students, so he gave us a lot of independence. He would teach maybe 1 or 2 days a week, and then we would work on the computers for the rest of the week. Not much would be said, and he would play music and let us work most of the time. and when we got done and had free time, we could just play around on the computers. There were times where either an assistant basketball coach would come into our classroom, or our teacher would leave and go to theirs. They would quietly talk strategy for literally the entire class period sometimes. It never bothered me. In fact, I liked it, because being able to just get my work done on the computer was nice. The teacher didn't care if we went around on our phones either. The classroom was a smaller computer lab, and it was kind of out of the way in one of the long hallways near the end of the school. One day, all 5 of us students arrived for class like usual. Our teacher went over the plan for the day, and then he said that he would be back in a bit. He was going to one of the assistant coaches' rooms to talk strategy again. All of us got to work and began doing our assignments. About 30 minutes later, there was an announcement over the school intercom. It said that the school was being locked down and for teachers to follow the lockdown procedures. After this, the 5 of us kind of looked around at each other. We were sort of confused as to what we should do. I didn't know if we were supposed to get up and go lock the door and stuff, or if our teacher would return. We all figured that he would be back soon though, so none of us did anything. After like 5 minutes went by, one of the other students got up and turned the lights off. We still figured that the teacher would come back soon though. After like 10 more minutes, there was still nothing. Then we heard footsteps in the hallway. I expected it to be the teacher. A short time later, the door opened. We were all sitting at the back side of the classroom behind computers and facing the front. What we saw was a man enter the room who was not our teacher. I just remember that he had a messy beard, long stringy hair, and looked somewhat disheveled, wearing a black jacket and jeans. He entered the room and then took a few steps in. Then he looked around and seemed to notice us. As soon as he looked at us, he said, "Nobody say a word." The way he said it was really threatening. I was honestly pretty scared. The man paced back and forth, looking at us for a few seconds. Then he said, "Am I understood?" We all nodded our heads, not knowing what the guy was capable of. Then he walked over to the door and looked out of the window into the hallway. It looked like he was keeping watch and hiding. We all just sat there, frozen in fear pretty much. The guy would look out of the door window for a while, then pace around a little bit, look at us, then return to the door window. This went on for like 5 minutes. I didn't notice hearing anything else in the hallway during this time or anything. Then the man went to the door, opened it, and ran out. As soon as he was gone, another student ran over to the door and locked it. Then I think we all called 911 at once. We reported the guy, knowing that he was more than likely the cause for the school lockdown. We were told that the police were there already and inside of the school searching for him. About 20 minutes later, the lockdown was lifted. Shortly after, our teacher returned. The man was caught and arrested after trying to escape the school. Why he was there in the first place, I never found out. Our teacher was watching film with another coach on the complete opposite end of the school. He tried to walk back to us, but the police stopped him, saying that he was walking where the suspicious man had been. The cops had been called earlier after another teacher saw the guy and he allegedly threatened him. So we were kind of left there wondering what to do, and unfortunately we did not lock the door. Thankfully, nobody was harmed though.
This happened many years ago when I was in high school. I had gone to school about 40 minutes early one day to make up a test. I had missed the class period on a field trip, and we just so happened to have a big test that day. My teacher was nice though, and he allowed me to make it up before class. This class was also the first period of the day. My teacher told me that we weren't doing anything that was that important, so to take all the time that I needed. I took the test in an otherwise empty classroom that did not belong to my teacher or any teacher in particular. I was all alone in the classroom as my teacher went back to his room. When I would be done with the test, I already had a pass filled out from the teacher in case I went into class time. Then I would be able to join the class. So I got the test from the teacher, walked down to the other classroom, and started the test. It went by pretty smooth, and I was typically pretty good at tests in that class. I ended up finishing about 10 minutes into first period though, which was not too bad. I got my stuff and then had the test and the pass in my hand. Then I left the classroom and headed down the hallway to my first period. It was all the way on the complete other side of the school though, so I had to walk a pretty long ways. And literally about 20 seconds after I started walking there, I heard a sound over the school intercom. There was an announcement that the school was being locked down. When I heard this, I realized that I needed to speed up. I walked faster to get back to my classroom. Obviously, a lockdown meant that they were locking all the doors. The hallways were completely empty as I walked through them. I was feeling nervous, one because I didn't know what the lockdown was for, and 2, because I didn't want to get in trouble for being in the hallway when lockdowns were happening. We had a drill once, and they were saying that nobody was supposed to be in the hallways during a lockdown. That's when I realized a huge shortcut to get to my classroom faster. If I cut through the gym, that would save me a lot of time. The only problem was I didn't know if a class was going on in the gym and I might disrupt them. So I walked over to one of the doors that led to the gyms. There were about 3 or 4 gyms, and some of them were separated by temporary divider walls that would lower from the ceiling. I carefully opened up a door, which was surprisingly unlocked. I saw an empty gym and I walked inside. Then I started walking across it to get to the doors on the other side. When I did that, I would just have to go down that hallway, and then it would connect with the one that my class was in. As I was walking through the gym though, all of a sudden I saw this guy come out of seemingly nowhere. I did not know who he was. The man had long hair and appeared to be in his 30s, and did not work at the school. He then walked over and stood right in front of the doors that I was trying to get to. I stopped right where I was, and then I turned around and started walking back. I had a bad feeling about the guy, and right when I turned around, I noticed that he started walking after me. I went faster and I left the room. Then I sprinted down the hallway, running as fast as I could run. I had barely made it around the corner when I heard the door opening, which I had just gone through. I panicked and I saw a door to a janitor's closet and went for it. I opened the door, went inside, and saw that it was very dark in there, but I just wanted a place to hide. After going inside, I quickly shut the door and went to the back of it. There was some random junk in there. It was overall pretty cluttered. So I went to the back of it and I hid behind some box. Now, unfortunately, I couldn't hear anything that was going on outside of this little closet, so I had no idea where this guy was. I just hid back there and hoped that the guy would go away and not go into the closet that I was in. I stayed there for what felt like forever. I listened closely, but I couldn't really hear anything. Then, finally, after 30 minutes at least, I heard a noise come over the intercom again. I could just barely hear it. There was no speaker in the janitor's closet, but I could actually hear this from the hallway. I got up and went to the front of the room and listened through the door. I just barely heard that the lockdown was over. So I left my hiding place and then went to my class. My teacher had been wondering what had happened to me. I ended up telling my experience to the whole class. I didn't hear much about who the guy was or why he was in the school, but I did find out that the same guy that I saw was the cause of the lockdown. It's pretty crazy looking back. I'm not sure what would have happened if I didn't hide.
Something really scary happened to me when I was in high school. It all started one day when I was a junior. To that point, it seemed like a very normal school year. I was kept very busy as I was involved in sports, school activities, and had a lot of friends as well. This was in first semester and I played on the volleyball team, so we had practices or games on most days. My best friend Rachel and I had a class together during third period. Between every class, we had our lockers next to each other and we would hang out by them and other people in our grade. So I remember that one day Rachel and I got to our class. Most of the hour went by like normal, but sort of towards the end, there was suddenly an announcement for a lockdown. Everyone in the class got nervous and was wondering what it could be about. We followed the lockdown procedure. All the students had to move to the back of the classroom. The door was locked and the lights were turned out. We were all told to be quiet. This went on for about 30 to 45 minutes probably. Then it was over. It was announced that it was safe to return to classes like normal. Obviously, the period was over by then, so we left the class and went into passing time. When I got back to my locker, I saw that there was a small sticky note on it which had not been there before. I looked at it and written on the inside was a handwritten note which said, "I'll be waiting for you." I was very confused when I saw this. I didn't know what it meant or who it was from. I showed it to Rachel, who was just as confused as I was. So we asked a few friends nearby thinking maybe it was a joke, but nobody knew anything. I didn't connect it to the lockdown at all at that point, as it just wasn't on my mind to do so. I was wondering what the lockdown was for, and a lot of people were talking about it. Nobody seemed to know though. The only thing I heard was someone say that someone else said some guy was in the school. You know how rumors can be made up or travel in a high school, so I didn't know if this was true or not. But either way, it was safe now as we were allowed to return to classes. The rest of the school day went on as normal. After school, I had volleyball practice, which didn't start right away because we had to wait to get in the gym. So I hung out at the school with my teammates. We then had practice, and it wasn't until like 6 p.m. that I was done for the day and could go home. So I left and then went to drive back. By now, the school was quiet and it was getting dark outside as well. After I left the school, I remember that a car pulled out onto the road behind me and started following me. I didn't know that it was following me at first, but then it got really close. When I turned, it turned as well. This continued, and I was annoyed as to why it was following me so close. However, I did not recognize the car or know who might possibly be driving it. I continued to drive home, which would take me almost 15 minutes. The more turns I made, the car was still there. I was getting worried and wondering what I should do. I could not tell at all who was driving. I could just barely see the figure of a person in the driver's seat. It was just too far away and too dark to see any details. When I was getting close to my neighborhood, the car was still there. It was literally just us two out on the road. Before our street, I started driving around the block. The car was still there. I started turning randomly, which the car would do as well. Every turn I made, it made. I then took out my phone and called my dad because I was freaking out. He told me to keep driving and not stop, and he was on his way. I stayed on the line with him and he asked me where I was. He then drove out in his truck and got behind the car that was following me. At first he honked, but the car did nothing and continued following. It was then a line of us 3 cars randomly driving down these residential streets at night. My dad then drove right up behind the car. He actually hit the back of the car with his truck, not that hard, but bumping him. He honked again. The car then turned at the next street, which is not where we were going, and it sped away. We then went back home, and my dad called the cops as well. We told them about what had happened. It was then after the dust had settled and I was back home that I started to connect the lockdown to the note and to the guy following me. I wondered if someone was stalking me. I went on my Instagram account and realized that I had a bunch of message requests from a user. I hadn't realized this because they didn't show up with the normal messages. You had to click over to requests, which I never did. This user had been sending me messages for days. They started out fairly normal, but eventually he said that he was going to find me and come to my school. I showed them to my principal the following day and the police got called in. I told them everything and they did an investigation. I remember that they ended up finding the guy, thankfully. It was a pretty crazy situation though. I hadn't noticed because I had just been so busy with everything, but I'm glad that nothing bad ended up happening. I remember one really scary experience that I had back when I was in high school. I was a sophomore and I used to ride the bus to and from school every day. One day, there was a pretty typical day of school. I went to all my classes and nothing strange or unusual happened. When the last bell of the day rang at 2:45 p.m., school was out and we could go home. I remember that this time was always crazy and would be a mad dash to get to the bus on time. A lot of kids went to my school, and in between every class the hallways would be packed. So after school it was always really tough to walk through the halls, and the buses left at just after 2:50, so you only had 5 minutes to get to them. On this day I left my classroom and made my way to my locker. I had to go there to get something before going to the bus. This proved to be a mistake, because after literally running through the hallways and getting outside, I saw that I had missed the bus. I was really disappointed, because I lived too far away from the school to walk home. I also didn't have any good friends with cars, so I would have to wait for my mom to get off of work and give me a ride. Fortunately for me, my mom got off of work at about 3:30 or 4 p.m. usually, so I would only have to wait at the school for about an hour or so. So after calling my mom, I went back inside of the school, not really knowing what I was supposed to do. I had never missed the bus before and had never stayed after school unless I had a sports practice. When I went back inside of the school, I saw that there were only a few students still inside, mostly just upperclassmen who drove themselves. Within probably 10 more minutes, the hallways became completely empty with just me walking down them. Now, my school did not really have any places to hang out at all. There were no study areas or couches or chairs set up. It was just hallways and classrooms really. So I figured that I would just walk the halls while I waited for my mom to come to the school. I remember that I walked the halls for maybe 15 or 20 minutes. I made it towards the back end of the school, and things were completely empty. Then, I heard this sound come over the school speakers. It was followed by an announcement that there was a lockdown and that this was not a drill. At first, I was very confused. I didn't know that there would be lockdowns when school was not in session, and I didn't really know what I was supposed to do in this type of a situation. Obviously, I was not in class and didn't have a classroom to go to either. I looked around at the classrooms that I was passing by, and all their doors were closed and they seemed to be empty. I kept walking, thinking maybe I would just leave the school altogether. That's when I came around a corner, and way up down the hallway, I saw this guy wearing all black and a ski mask on his head. I knew that something was up there, and I quickly went back around the corner. I saw the bathrooms and quickly went inside them. Once I was there, I stopped and listened to see if the person would go near. I figured the bathrooms were really the only place I could hide for the lockdown. For a minute or two, things were pretty quiet and I didn't hear anything. Then I started to hear footsteps not far out in the hallway. They didn't really get that close though, but seemed to be a ways away. Moments later, I heard a very loud banging sound, like someone was smashing the lockers or something. I didn't know what exactly it was, but it made me feel on edge. These sounds went on for a while. Then, after about a minute or so of quiet, I heard more loud banging followed by the sound of glass breaking. It was from a ways down the hallway, but I no longer felt safe hiding in the bathroom. When things quieted down a little bit again, I knew that I needed to get out of there. I carefully went to the entrance of the bathrooms and looked out into the hallway. I didn't see anything, indicating that the sounds I heard must not have been within my sight. Then I quickly left the bathroom and ran the opposite direction to where I had heard the noises. I ran all the way until I got to the front of the school. When I got towards the lobby, I saw a police officer. He seemed a little bit surprised to see me, but I quickly told him how I had seen a guy in a ski mask and stuff. Another police officer who had entered the school told me to go outside the front door and they would handle it. I went out and there were several police cars. I waited there while the police went inside, and my mom got there a little while later. I was able to go home with her and there were a bunch of police cars still there and the police in the school at that point. I went home and heard about the rest on the news. The police had ended up finding a guy inside and catching him. The man had simply walked inside the school wearing a ski mask after hours. Obviously it was suspicious and he got reported. I guess he went around and caused a bunch of damage to the school, breaking windows to several classrooms and breaking other equipment as well. That must have been what I had heard. It was a very scary situation and I'm glad that I was able to get out of it. This is something that happened back when I was in high school. It was my sophomore year, and I went to a pretty average-sized school. One day, my third-hour class ended, which I had with my best friend Josh. It was now study hall, which I had in another classroom that was on the second floor. Josh had another class at the other end of the school. Josh and I walked together to our lockers, which were down in the commons area on the first floor. The hallways were already pretty quiet during this time. As we walked down the stairs, we were talking to each other and taking our time. It didn't really matter if we were late to study hall, because it wasn't a real class. You would just sit there and do homework or go on your phone the whole time, and the teachers didn't really do anything. So when we got to our lockers, there weren't really any other students around. We were still talking, and we heard a sound come over the school intercom that was not just the typical bell sound. However, I didn't really hear it. We were mid-conversation, and when we heard some talking over the intercom, we quieted down. I didn't catch it, and I asked Josh what the announcement was. He said it was a lockdown drill, so we continued talking. Josh then said that he was going to his class and walked away. After hearing there was a lockdown drill, I didn't really want to go to my classroom right away. I figured that it would be weird to walk in during a lockdown drill, so I would just stay in the hallways until it was over. The drills usually only lasted like 5 minutes anyways. My teacher would figure out that I just went to another room for the drill probably. So I started to walk slowly down the hallways, taking my time. It was now completely empty and also silent. I did want to avoid anybody else in the hallways though, because I didn't want to get in trouble for being in the hallways during a lockdown drill. As I slowly walked down a nearby hallway, I heard footsteps a ways behind me approaching. So I moved down the hallway and then turned to the left. I started quietly walking down this hallway, which was very long. I hoped that the footsteps would move away. Unfortunately, they didn't. I heard the footsteps continuing to get close to me. I started walking down the hallway as quickly as I could as the footsteps approached the corner. But there was really nowhere to go, so I decided to quickly find a place to hide. I went in between a row of lockers out of desperation. I was out of the person's sight for now, but when they got even with me in the hallway they would be able to see me. My heart was racing and I didn't know what was going to happen. The footsteps got into the hallway, and I was sure that it was a hall monitor or a teacher and that I would be in trouble. I decided to look and see who it was, but when I did, it was not who I expected. I saw that there was a man walking down the hallway that I did not recognize. He wasn't a teacher or anything like that, and certainly not a student. It was some guy just wearing a sweatshirt and jeans. He was walking down the hallway and in my direction, but didn't seem like he knew that I was there. As he got closer and closer, I was starting to wonder what was going on. Maybe it wasn't a lockdown drill after all, but an actual lockdown. The man got within probably 50 feet of me. Then he stopped right in front of several lockers. What he did next was very unexpected. The man climbed on top of the lockers, now standing where he had to crouch to not hit his head on the ceiling. He proceeded to remove one of the ceiling tiles and then crawled up into it, going into the ceiling. I couldn't believe what I had seen. I quickly left my hiding place and then sprinted down the hallway all the way to my classroom. When I got there, I banged on the door and I was let in by my teacher. He asked me where I had been, and I told him that I saw a guy go into the ceiling. He called the vice principal, and I later talked with him about it. The school was locked down for over an hour. Eventually, they found the man. He was a guy who had been living in the school for several days. He was able to move around in the ceilings and in back hallways. The school was kind of old and outdated, and had a decent amount of places he could hide, I guess. It was really creepy. Back when I was a freshman in high school, I will never forget the first ever lockdown I experienced. I was a short, small 14-year-old girl at the time. I had just finished my first hour class and was on my way to second. It was at the complete other end of the school, so it was kind of a long walk. I made my way over there like any other time. As I walked, I remember hearing the warning bell, and the hallway quickly got more and more empty. I was still confident that I would be on time to my class though. But then, not too long after that, I heard another bell. I knew that this couldn't be the final bell because it definitely hadn't been 2 minutes since the warning bell, but I was starting to second guess myself. There was an announcement that followed the bell, and I could hear somebody talking. However, our speaker system at the school was old and really bad quality. It sounded like whoever was talking had the microphone in their mouth and I couldn't make out a word. It was just a bunch of nothing. I wasn't quite sure what was going on, but I continued walking down the hallways and I was very quickly the only person around. Finally, I made it to my classroom. When I tried to open the door though, it was locked. I was confused and not sure what was happening. As I stood around by the door, I heard a voice from a ways away in the hallway. Somebody asked me what I was doing. I looked over and saw a woman standing there. I didn't recognize her, but I thought she was a teacher. I was a freshman after all and didn't know every staff member yet. After she asked me what I was doing, I told her that I was trying to go to my class. She called me over to her and told me that the school was in a lockdown. I hadn't known that, but now that she mentioned it, it made sense. I walked over to the woman and she told me in a stern voice to follow her. I figured that I was in trouble for being in the hallways during a lockdown. We walked to the end of the hallway and then to the right around a corner. There was the exit doors and we walked right for them. I was confused as to why we were leaving the school, but I continued following her. Soon we walked right out of the doors. That was at the back sort of side exit to the school. It wasn't that commonly used and it headed out to the east side near the school. When we walked out of the doors, at first we turned to the right again. At that point though, I noticed a police car driving down the street that was in our view, and it was driving towards the school. Almost right after noticing that, the woman quickly turned around and changed directions. She grabbed my arm and we started walking in the opposite direction. I really didn't know what was going on. I was so young, so I wasn't as quick to catch on to bad situations. But by now, I was pretty sure that I shouldn't be following this woman anymore. She started walking over to behind the school and in a grassy area. When we got over there is when I randomly just decided to run away. I just simply stopped following the woman, turned around, and sprinted back for the door of the school. I heard the woman call out to me, but she did not give chase. When I made it back to the school doors that I had left through though, they were locked. So at that point, I ran back around the school towards the front. I saw several police cars there and an officer stopped me from entering the school and asked me what was going on. When I told him, he waited with me by the police cars for the rest of the lockdown. Apparently, the reason for the lockdown in the first place was that very same woman. She did not work at the school or anything. They were able to find her walking on the side of the road about a half-mile away behind the school. I'm not sure if her intentions were to kidnap me or any random kid, but I realized how close I came to the possibility of getting abducted. That was the scariest moment of my high school career for sure.
This happened back when I was in high school. It was during my senior year in the fall semester. I remember that I had study hall, and during this time I would often go to the library. We were allowed to, but I was one of the only students that did. Most of the other kids liked to stay in their classroom and work there. If I didn't have any homework, I would stay in the classroom myself. But when I was working on stuff, I'd go to the library because it was much easier to focus there. So one day, I was in the library doing homework during study hall. I was listening to music on my headphones, and I was able to finish my homework with a little bit of time left in class. I was going to leave the library early to go to my locker before the final class of the day. At my high school, the rules were not really that strict. You didn't even really need a pass to walk in the hallways during class periods. So I headed out from the library, I think about 3 or 4 minutes before class would be let out. I walked back to my locker, which took a few minutes. Then I put my books away and got the one for my final class. Then I stood around at my locker and looked at the time. Class was out by now, but I was not seeing any students in the hallways. This made me a bit confused. Now I took my headphones out, which had been in the entire time playing music. Things were completely silent. I was really confused, so I just walked to my next classroom. But when I got there, the door was locked. At this point, I still didn't think of a lockdown. I started heading back to my locker, thinking of what could possibly be going on. I hadn't heard the lockdown announcement because I had my headphones in. When I made it back to my locker and saw that the halls were still empty, I checked my watch and phone for the time. My times were not off, and I matched them with the school clock. I just didn't understand where everybody was. Then, I finally realized that there must be a lockdown going on. At first, I was thinking and hoping that maybe it was a drill. So I started to go to my classroom again and was going to knock on the door. My teacher would then be able to let me in. I had to go down a couple of hallways to get there. When I went down one, I passed by a staircase and I heard multiple people walking down. After I passed it, I looked back and I saw these 3 men going down the stairs. Each of the 3 guys were wearing all black clothing and ski masks. Instantly, I had a bad feeling about it. I kept walking and then quickly went around a corner. But when I did, I looked back for a moment and saw the 3 guys looking in my direction and starting to walk towards me. They were a long ways back, but this was still terrifying. At this point, I could only assume that the school was locked down because of them. I quickly went around the corner and just hoped that the guys wouldn't follow me. But as I made it to the end of that hallway, I looked back. I thought for a moment that I was good, but then I noticed all 3 of the men walking around the corner and coming towards me. I was terrified. I started walking extremely fast to the end of the hallway that I was in. When I made it towards the end though, I recognized a classroom. It was one of a teacher that I had previously had who I knew pretty well. It was a risk to stop, but I decided to. I started knocking on the door extremely fast. I also called out the teacher's name. For a few seconds, there was nothing. I tried the door, but of course, it was locked. I turned and saw the men coming around this corner too. They looked right at me. For a moment, I was about to turn and run, but then the door opened. I quickly went inside and then shut the door and locked it behind me. The men did not try entering the room or knock on the door, so they must have passed by. But I'm still confident that the guys were going after me until I got in the classroom. The lockdown continued for a while after that. I told the teacher about the guys, and she called it in to somebody. Eventually, after like 30 more minutes, the lockdown finally ended. The 3 men left the school, but were tracked down a ways away. I really never learned much more about it than that. I just know that it was one of the scariest moments of my life when I saw those guys in the hallway. I'm really glad that everybody was okay.
I used to work part-time as a substitute teacher. I really liked it because it was pretty easy. I mostly just had to take attendance and give the class a task to do or else put on a movie or something like that. Sure, I was always nervous that I might get a super crazy class of kids, but that never really happened. So one day, I was asked to come in and sub for just 1 hour. It was the final hour of the school day and the teacher was leaving early. So I would just be there for the final hour of the day, really easy, or so I thought. I arrived at the school about midway through the second to last hour of the day. I arrived at the teacher's room, who did not have class that hour, so the room was unlocked for me but empty. The teacher had left already, so I had some time to get into the room and wait for the next class period. A short while after I got into the room, maybe 10 minutes, I heard an announcement come over the school intercom. It said that there was a lockdown and that it was not a drill. I obviously had no clue why, but I decided to follow the procedures. So I went over to the door, locked it, and turned out the lights. I was honestly happy that no students were in my classroom yet. I figured that I would just sit and wait it out, and hopefully it was nothing bad. I didn't get any message or indication of what the lockdown was about, so I just sat in the room, and it was pretty much complete silence. After about 10 seconds though, the silence was broken when I heard somebody trying to open the classroom door. It startled me and I shot up in my seat. I looked over to the small window in the door, which I had forgot to cover. It was one of those small windows that's tall but narrow. I saw a woman standing there outside the door. Right when I looked over at her, she quickly disappeared. I thought that she might be another teacher, so I got up and started to walk over to the door. The way that she quickly moved away from the door when seeing me, though, seemed a little bit odd. Still, I walked over there anyways. I opened the door to the classroom, and I saw the woman standing about 10 feet away. She looked back at me and quickly said hi to me and asked if I was a substitute. I said yes and asked if she needed something. She told me that she was looking for the teacher who's normally there. I told her that she was gone for the day and that I was subbing for her final hour. I also asked her if she knew why there was a lockdown. She said that she didn't know, but she had to get going. Then she quickly walked away. Something about her seemed a little off, but I just went back to the classroom and went inside. I sat back down at the desk and continued to wait out the lockdown. About 10 minutes later, I heard someone try to open the door again. I looked over, but this time could not see anybody in the window. I got up and walked over to the door again. I opened it, but this time there was nobody in the hallway. I was very confused, but just sat back down at the desk once again. The lockdown lasted for about another 30 minutes and then was finally over. After that, the class that I was subbing for came in for the final class of the day. During the class, I found out about the lockdown because the students were talking about it. I'm not sure how they found out, but what I heard shocked me. They said some lady had entered the school and tried to ask students to leave with her. She got reported because nobody knew who she was or why she was there, and they thought that she was acting really weird. Then, when a staff member approached her, she pepper sprayed him. It was the same woman who I had spoke to in the hallway. She ended up being found eventually, but she had tried to enter the classroom that I was in. I'm not sure why. The thing that creeps me out the most, though, is how she went back to my classroom again after the first time. This happened back during my senior year of high school. For this particular semester, I remember that I didn't have a class during first period. This was a common thing for seniors, and it meant that I could wake up late and show up to school when first period was almost over. It always felt really nice to do that because I had been getting up super early for years. So one day, I arrived at school with about 10 minutes or so left in first period. I entered the school and then began walking the empty hallways to my locker. When I was doing this though, I heard over the school intercom that there was a lockdown. Now, I didn't really know what to do in this situation because I didn't have a class to go to, so I decided to just go into the bathroom, which looking back was a stupid decision. Obviously, I should have just found a random classroom, but that's easy to say now. I didn't know why there was a lockdown, but I thought that I could just go into a bathroom and hopefully school would resume shortly. After getting inside, there was silence for a minute or so. Then I heard footsteps approaching in the hallway. I thought that most likely it was a teacher, and I was slightly wondering if I would get in trouble if they saw me. But I wasn't too worried, because I would just explain how I had just got there and I wasn't in a class yet. The footsteps approached the bathroom that I was in, but they walked right past it. They went down the hallway and got quieter and quieter. I felt relieved that they had passed, but then they seemed to turn around. I heard the footsteps moving back and now heading in my direction again. I wondered why they had turned around. I also wondered who it was out there. I thought about going to see, but just had a bad feeling about it and decided not to. So I stayed where I was, and once more the footsteps got closer, but now they were from the other direction. Once more they passed right by the bathroom that I was in and continued down the hallway. This time they went just out of earshot and then they turned around. Once more they walked towards the bathroom and went past it. Then they passed the bathroom 2 or 3 more times. It was like somebody was out there pacing back and forth down the hallway in front of the bathrooms. I found it really strange. and other than those footsteps, everything was completely silent. Finally, they walked away and I stopped hearing them entirely. So this time, I decided that I wanted to get away from there. I was going to leave the bathroom and just go to the room where my first class of the day would be and hope to be let in. So after not hearing anything for like over a minute, I left the bathroom and went out into the hallway. However, as soon as I got there, I saw a man standing in the hallway right in the middle of it a ways down. The man was wearing a suit and a tie, but I did not recognize him to work at the school. He was not looking at me, but staring straight ahead. And the creepiest part is that he had this really large, fake-looking grin on his face. The whole sight was very unsettling. Then the man started to walk towards me slowly. He still wasn't looking at me and not walking directly at me, but in the general direction that I was in. He remained in the center of the hallway as he walked. I was so freaked out that I just took off running as fast as I could in the opposite direction. I went all the way to the end of the hallway, turned, and then ran down another one. Then I sprinted to the classroom where I had my next class period and banged on the door desperately. After a few moments, the teacher came to the door, saw me, recognized me, and let me in. I told several students as well as the teacher about the strange man that I saw. They all thought that it was really weird, but nobody seemed to know why the school was locked down, but I assumed him to be the reason. We all waited in the classroom for another 30 minutes or so, and then finally the lockdown was over. Then the school day was resumed as normal. The strange thing is that I never got a good explanation as to what the lockdown was for. I didn't get confirmation that it was for that man that I saw, but I can only assume. I heard multiple things, but nothing confirming anything. It was really strange.